close your eyes. Let the heavy curtains of the present world fall away. Let the noise of the city, the hum of electricity, and the sharp, anxious frequencies of modern life dissolve into a soft, white mist. We are going to travel back, not merely in years, but in eras. We are drifting down the long, spiraling currents of deep time, moving upstream against the flow of history, past the rise of empires, past the forging of iron, past the very first flicker of a campfire in a dark cave. We are returning to the source. We are returning to the silence that reigned before the spoken word. Imagine the world as it was 10, perhaps 15 million years ago. It is a planet breathing in slow motion. The continents are drifting into familiar shapes, yet the lands we know are draped in a cloak of unrecognizable density. This is the epic of the Green Cathedral. The earth is warmer, wetter, a humid greenhouse where the sun struggles to pierce the overlapping canopies of a forest that seems to stretch from one horizon to the other without breaking. There are no highways cutting through this wilderness, no scars of agriculture, only an endless, undulant ocean of leaves swaying in a wind that carries the moisture of ancient seas. To walk here, or rather to climb here, for the floor is a dark and tangled place, is to enter a world of profound verticality. The light is green, filtered through tier upon tier of broad, waxy leaves, creating a submerged, aquarium-like luminosity. The air is physical, a heavy embrace of water vapor and oxygen, thick with the scent of crushed ferns, rotting mahogany, and the sweet, cloying perfume of fruits ripening in the shadows. It is a world of sensory saturation, yet it possesses a quietude that is almost absolute. It is the silence of growth. It is the sound of millions of tons of biomass drinking in the sun, carbon binding to carbon in a slow, silent chemistry that builds the pillars of this living temple. In this verdant expanse, our distant ancestors moved with the fluid grace of creatures perfectly adapted to their station. They were not yet human, not by the definitions we hold today. They were the dreamers in the trees, the great apes of the Miocene, suspended between the earth and the sky. Picture a creature, covered in fur the color of tree bark or the shadows of dusk, moving along a sturdy branch high above the forest floor. There is no urgency in its movement, no frantic scramble. It is a slow, deliberate navigation of a three-dimensional world. Long, powerful fingers curl around the rough texture of a branch, gripping with a strength that is born of necessity. The skin of the palms reads the wood, its dampness, its mossy coating, its stability, before the weight is transferred. These ancestors lived in a state of perpetual grazing. The concept of a meal as a discrete event, breakfast, lunch, dinner, did not exist. Instead, life was a continuous rhythmic engagement with the forest's bounty. The day began with the sun warming the upper canopy, stirring the troop from their sleeping nests woven into the forks of great ironwood trees. And from the moment of waking, the business of survival was the business of eating. But this was not the hunting of the later ages. There was no adrenaline-fueled chase, no bloody kill, no fire to roast the flesh. This was the era of the leaf, the stem, the pith, and the fruit. Consider the challenge of this existence. The forest is generous, but it is also guarded. The energy of the sun is locked away inside complex fortresses of cellulose and lignin. A leaf is not merely food. It is an armored structure, designed to resist being broken down. To survive on such a diet, to build muscle and bone and milk from the fibrous matter of plants, requires a biological commitment of immense scale. Our ancestors were not the masters of fire who could pre-digest their food with heat. They were biological machines, tuned to the slow frequency of plants. And so, we look to the abdomen. In the silhouette of these ancient wanderers, the belly was the defining feature. It was round, distended, tight like a drum. It was not the flat, muscular stomach of the modern runner, but a magnificent, protruding vessel. Within this belly lay the secret of our survival in the Green Cathedral. It was a cavernous internal laboratory, a fermentation vat of industrial proportions. At the junction of the small and large intestines, where today we carry a shriveled vestige, there sat a massive, robust organ, the cecum. Picture this organ not as a piece of anatomy, but as a landscape in itself. It was a great warm pouch, a blind-ended sac that served as the engine room of the body. Inside this dark, oxygen-deprived chamber, a universe existed. Trillions of bacteria, a diverse and thriving ecosystem of microscopic life swirled in a metabolic dance. These were the fermenters, the breakers of chains. When our ancestor swallowed a mouthful of tough, fibrous fig leaves or striped bark, the stomach acid could do little more than soften the mass. The true alchemy happened here, in the Great Cauldron of the cecum. The bacteria, ancient allies acquired from the mother at birth and replenished by the soil and the environment, set to work on the cellulose. They secreted enzymes that the ape's body could not produce. They attacked the rigid cell walls of the plants, fermenting them, breaking them down into short-chain fatty acids, pure energy that could be absorbed into the bloodstream. This process was not fast. It was a slow burn. It generated heat, keeping the ancestor warm in the cool mists of the rainforest morning. It generated gas, the byproduct of industry, causing the belly to rumble and gurgle, the internal song of the forest being transmuted into life. Imagine a day in the life of this ancestor. It is mid-afternoon. The heat is at its peak, and the forest is loud with the sawing of cicadas, a wall of sound that rises and falls like a breathing lung. The troop has found a grove of ficus trees. The ancestor sits comfortably in the crotch of a massive branch, 80 feet above the dark, fern-covered ground. The posture is slumped, relaxed, the heavy belly resting against the thighs. The hands, leathery and dexterous, pluck a handful of leaves. They are inspected with amber eyes, sniffed for signs of toxicity, and then folded into the mouth. Then begins the chewing. The jaw is heavy. The muscles attached to the side of the skull are thick and powerful. The molars are broad, flat millstones, their enamel thick and ridged. Grind, grind, grind. The rhythm is hypnotic. The eyes glaze over, half closing, watching the play of light on the leaves nearby, watching the motes of dust dancing in a shaft of sunlight. But the mind is quiet. There is no planning for tomorrow, no regret for yesterday. There is only the taste of the sap, the resistance of the fiber, and the feeling of the pulp sliding down the throat to join the churning mass below. In this state, the boundary between the animal and the plant seems to blur. The ancestor is merely a vessel for the forest to experience itself. The carbon that makes up the ape's body was, days ago, the carbon of the tree. The water in its blood was the rain caught in a bromeliad. The connection is visceral and immediate. There is a sense of profound safety in the canopy. The predators, the saber-toothed cats, the ground-dwelling hyenas, are far below, prowling the shadows of the floor. Up here, in the Green Cathedral, there is a sanctuary of height. The primary danger is gravity, and the ancestor respects it with every deliberate placement of a foot, every grip of a hand. As the afternoon wears on, the light shifts, turning from the bright white of noon to the golden, syrupy light of the magic hour. The troop begins to move toward their sleeping trees. The digestion does not stop. The internal furnace continues to burn. The great sacrum is full, heavy with the day's harvest. The energy released by the bacteria flows into the bloodstream, repairing the micro tears in the muscles caused by climbing, growing new fur, fueling the slow, steady beat of the heart. There is a communal aspect to this life. Nearby, another member of the troop reaches out a dark hand and begins to groom our ancestor's shoulder. The rhythmic picking through the fur, the removal of small insects and debris, induces a trance-like state. It is a language of touch, a bonding hormone released into the blood, oxytocin flowing alongside the nutrients. The gut rumbles, a sound of contentment. In the deep quiet of the prehistoric world, these bodily sounds are not rude or hidden. They are the signals of health, of a day well spent, of a belly full of fuel. Night falls over the Green Cathedral. It is a darkness more complete than anything modern humans experience. The canopy blocks out the stars, leaving only the faintest navy blue glow filtering through the gaps. The noises change. The cicadas fall silent, replaced by the chirping of tree frogs and the haunting, whooping calls of nocturnal lemurs or bush babies. The ancestor curls into a nest constructed of bent branches and woven leaves, a platform of comfort high in the void. Sleep comes easily. The body is tired from the constant climbing. The jaw aches pleasantly from the hours of chewing. But even in sleep, the Great Cauldron is at work. It is the night shift of the body. The fermentation reaches its peak, the bacteria working in the warm dark, turning the roughage of the day into the vitality of tomorrow. The appendix, or rather, the cecum, as it was then, is the hero of this story. It is the reason the ancestor can survive on a diet that would starve a modern human. It is the bridge between the incredible abundance of the forest and the biological needs of the mammal. For millions of years, this was the way of things. It was a stable equilibrium. The climate remained warm, the forests remained vast. Generation after generation was born into the green, lived in the green, and died in the green, their bodies returning to the soil to feed the very trees that had fed them. The genetic code was written and rewritten to optimize this existence. The genes for strong jaws, for large molars, for the massive cecum were selected for, polished, and perfected. We often think of evolution as a march of progress, a ladder climbing upward. But in the Green Cathedral, there was no up, only here. The ancestor was not a primitive version of a human. It was a perfect version of itself. It was a master of its domain. The appendix was not a mystery then. It was as vital as the heart, as essential as the lungs. It was the second stomach, the silent partner, the guarantor of life in a world of leaves. But time is not static. The earth is a restless sleeper, tossing and turning in its orbit. Deep beneath the crust, tectonic plates were grinding against one another. Far away, mountains were rising, diverting the winds, stealing the rain. The global thermostat was slowly, imperceptibly dialing down. The great humid embrace of the Miocene was beginning to cool. The edges of the Green Cathedral were starting to brown, to fray, to retreat. The ancestor, sleeping in the nest, could not know that the world was changing. It could not know that the endless ocean of green was destined to fracture. It could not know that the massive organ gurgling in its belly would one day become a liability, a heavy anchor in a race for speed. For now, there was only the leaf, the branch, and the peace of the deep forest. The ticking time bomb was not yet ticking. It was simply a room full of friends, a safe house for the bacteria that made life possible, humming quietly in the dark, waiting for the dawn of a harder, colder world. And so we leave them there, suspended in the amber of the past, the large-bellied grazers, the kings and queens of the canopy, chewing slowly as the sun sets over a world that is about to vanish. The silence of the forest is heavy, holding its breath. The Green Cathedral stands tall, its pillars firm, its stained glass leaves filtering the light of a younger sun. But the wind is changing. Can you feel it? A coolness on the back of the neck, a dryness in the air. The era of the garden is ending. The era of the wilderness is about to begin. If you were to stand before one of our distant ancestors in the slanting light of a Pliocene afternoon, your eyes would be drawn not to their face, nor to their hands, but to the center of their being. We often imagine these early wanderers, the Australopithecines, the Paranthropus, the early voyagers of the genus Homo, through the lens of modern cinema, picturing them with the ripped, taut abdomens of athletes. But the fossil record and the logic of biology tell a different, rounder story. To survive in that ancient world, one did not need the flat stomach of a sprinter. One needed a furnace. Deep within the anatomy of these ancient wanderers sat a biological marvel, a vast fermentation chamber that was the predecessor of what we now dismissively call the appendix. In those days, millions of years before the first city rose from the dust, this organ was not a small, withered finger. It was not a vestige. It was a king. It was a robust and spacious pouch, a vital organ known as the sacrum, though even that clinical name fails to capture its majesty. Picture it instead as a great warm cauldron, a biological vat humming with invisible life, seated at the crossroads of the digestive tract. It was the heavy anchor of the body, a distinct and swollen vessel where the hard work of existence truly took place. Let us descend into the microscopic landscape of this lost world. To understand the Great Cauldron, we must shrink our perspective until we are smaller than a grain of pollen, drifting into the warm, dark currents of the ancestors' interior. Here, there is no light, only the rhythmic pulsing of muscle walls, a peristaltic tide that pushes the river of consumed matter forward. But in the cecum, the river slows. It pools. It settles into a deep, anaerobic bay. Inside this chamber, a symbiotic universe thrived. It was a crowded, teeming galaxy of single-celled organisms, a population numbering in the trillions, far exceeding the number of stars in the visible sky or the number of humans who have ever walked the earth. These were the bacteria, the archaea, the ancient microbial lords of the gut. They were not invaders. They were allies. They were the silent partners in the struggle for life, a workforce recruited over eons of evolution. The relationship was a masterwork of negotiation, a biological treaty signed in the ink of DNA. The host, our heavy-browed, fur-covered ancestor, provided the vessel. They provided the warmth, the protection from the oxygen-rich outer world, which would kill these anaerobic guests, and a steady stream of raw material. In return, the bacteria provided the alchemy. They possessed the chemical keys that the mammal did not. You see, the forest is stubborn. The cell walls of plants are built of cellulose and lignin, complex interlocking chains of sugar that are stronger than steel on a molecular level. They are designed to resist being broken. The stomach of a primate, with its simple bath of acid, is helpless against such fortifications. It can soften them, strip them, but it cannot unlock the energy hiding inside. But the bacteria can. In the darkness of the Great Cauldron, the microbes swarmed over the shredded bits of tuber, the strips of bark, the coarse sedges and tough leaves. They released enzymes, tiny biological chisels, that severed the chemical bonds holding the plant matter together. It was a slow, fermentative fire. As the bonds broke, they released short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate. These were not waste products. They were pure fuel. They were absorbed directly through the walls of the cecum and into the bloodstream of the host, providing up to 30, perhaps 40% of the ancestors' daily energy. Pause to consider that. Nearly half of the energy that powered the legs to climb, the arms to carry, and the heart to beat came not from the food itself, but from the bacteria's waste after eating the food. We were powered by a foreign engine. The Great Cauldron was a second stomach, a backup generator that allowed our ancestors to look at a harsh, unforgiving landscape of dry stalks and bitter roots and see a feast. This internal reality dictated the external form. Because the diet was so poor in quality, a volume game of low-calorie roughage, the quantity had to be immense. An ancestor might spend 6, 7, even 8 hours a day simply chewing. To process such a bulk, the gut had to be long, looping, and voluminous. Consequently, the torso of our ancestors was shaped like a bell or a teardrop. They had a narrow chest that flared out into a wide, pot-bellied waist. Imagine a day in the life of this biology. It is the dry season in the Afar Triangle 3 million years ago. The lush canopy of the earlier epoch has fractured, leaving behind a mosaic of open woodland and scorching savanna. The sun is a relentless hammer beating against the golden grass. Our subject is a female, small in stature, perhaps 3.5 feet tall. Her skin is dark, protected by a layer of coarse hair that catches the dust of the plains. She moves with a rolling gait, her center of gravity low, her heavy belly swaying slightly with each step. She is hungry. The sweet fruits of the rainy season are gone. All that remains are the fallback foods, the tough underground storage organs of plants that have retreated from the sun. She kneels in the dirt, using a digging stick, a simple, unshaped branch, to pry a tuber from the hard-baked earth. It is gnarly, covered in grit, and fibrous as rope. She wipes it on her thigh, but she does not wash it. Why would she? The dirt is part of the cycle. The soil on the skin of the tuber is rich in the very bacteria her Great Cauldron needs to replenish its stocks. She bites into it. The sound is a loud, wet crunch. Her jaw muscles, anchored to a ridge of bone on the top of her skull, bulge with the effort. She chews and chews and chews. She is not savoring the flavor. She is processing material. She is a biological millstone. As she swallows, the bolus of food travels down past the acid bath of the stomach and enters the cecum. There, the fermentation begins. Fermentation is a gaseous process. It is a bubbling, churning chemical reaction. We, in our modern vanity, have come to view bloating and gas as signs of illness or social embarrassment. But for her, for the millions of years of our history, a distended, rumbling belly was the sign of a system working perfectly. The gurgling of the gut, the borborygmi, was the soundtrack of the Paleolithic rest period. Imagine the troop at midday, seeking shelter from the zenith sun under the spreading arms of an acacia tree. They lie in a pile, limbs draped over one another, grooming, dozing. The air is filled with the soft sounds of digestion. It is a comforting noise. It means the tribe has eaten. It means the internal fires are lit. A silent belly was a sign of danger, of starvation, of a furnace that had run out of coal. This massive digestive system came with a cost. It was heavy. It required blood flow. It generated immense amounts of heat. In the cool of the dawn, this heat was a blessing, radiating from the core to warm the extremities. But in the heat of the chase, it was a liability. One cannot run a marathon with a fermentation vat strapped to one's waist. The Great Cauldron demanded a slower pace of life. It tethered us to the rhythm of the browser, the grazer, the creature that moves from bush to bush, rather than the hunter that sprints across the horizon. Yet, there was a profound beauty in this adaptation. It represented a connection to the plant kingdom that we have largely lost. We were one with the foliage, and the foliage was one with us. When the ancestor looked at the forest, she did not see a separate entity. She saw her own external body. The carbon in the leaves would become the carbon in her bones. The water in the vine would become the plasma in her veins. The bacteria in the dirt would become the citizens of her inner world. There was no barrier between the self and the environment. The gut was merely a tube where the environment flowed through, paused to share its energy, and then flowed out again to fertilize the earth. This was the era of the Great Cauldron. It was a time of biological patience. Evolution had not yet prioritized the razor-sharp intellect or the lightning-fast reflex. It had prioritized efficiency. It had built a body capable of wringing life out of a stone, or at least out of a dry, woody root. It was a survival strategy built on tolerance. Tolerance of toxins, tolerance of parasites, tolerance of hunger. But deep time is a river that never stops flowing, and the environment was shifting once again. The great rift was pulling apart. The mountains were rising, blocking the clouds. The rains were failing. The forests were retreating further, leaving vast open arenas of grass and predator. The salad bowl of the world was emptying. The calorie density of the available plants was dropping, while the energy required to find them was rising. A crisis was approaching. The heavy, expensive machinery of the Great Cauldron was becoming a burden. The brain, that other energy-hungry organ, was beginning to demand more. The body cannot support two emperors. It cannot maintain a massive digestive system and a massive brain. The energy budget of a mammal is finite. To grow the mind, the gut would have to shrink. To build the toolmaker, the grazer would have to die. But that is a story for the future. For now, let us linger in the warmth of the ancient belly. Let us appreciate the cecum for what it was, a sanctuary. It was a safe house long before it became the appendix. It was a vault where the biological heritage of our species was stored. It held the genetic codes of the bacteria that had been with us since the dawn of vertebrates. As the sun sets on this chapter of our history, painting the savanna in hues of violet and burnt orange, the ancestors climb into the cliffs or the high branches to sleep. The temperature drops rapidly. The wind whistles through the thorns. But the ancestor is warm. Deep inside, the Great Cauldron is churning, a steady rhythmic combustion that keeps the cold at bay. The ticking time bomb of the modern appendix is, in this age, a life-giving hearth. It is the center of gravity. It is the heavy, warm anchor that holds the soul inside the body. In the silence of the genome, a decision is being weighed. A trade-off is being calculated by the blind arithmetic of natural selection. But for tonight, the system holds. The bacteria work their dark magic. The fibers unravel. The energy flows. And the ancestor sleeps, dreaming perhaps of endless green, unaware that the age of the leaf is ending, and the age of blood and fire is about to begin. The Great Cauldron bubbles on, a silent witness to the peak of a biological design that is about to be dismantled, brick, by the ruthless demands of a sharper, faster world. Let the image fade slowly, the round silhouettes against the night sky, the sound of the wind in the dry grass, the gentle rhythmic gurgle of 1,000,000 years of digestion. We are leaving the garden. We are leaving the comfort of the cauldron. The path ahead is steep, and we will have to travel light. As the curtain of time shifts, we must understand that this transformation didn't happen in a single generation. It wasn't a sudden eviction from the garden, but a slow, agonizing drift. Imagine the passage of 10,000 years as a single minute. In this accelerated view, we would see the forests pulsing, shrinking like a drying puddle. We would see the ancestors ranging further and further, their footprints connecting isolated groves of trees like a desperate constellation on the map of Africa. The Great Cauldron, so vital for the breakdown of leaves, began to encounter a new challenge, the challenge of quality over quantity. As the climate dried, the succulent, easy-to-digest plants died out first. Left behind were the tough, defensive plants, acacias with their vicious thorns, grasses loaded with silica that wore down teeth like sandpaper. To survive, the ancestors had to become cleverer foragers, but they also had to become opportunistic. Perhaps it began with a scavenging event. A troop of hominids, bellies rumbling with the ache of empty fermentation chambers, stumbling upon the kill of a leopard, a half-eaten gazelle baking in the sun. The smell of meat, metallic, rich, fatty, was alien, yet strangely compelling. Meat is the opposite of a tuber. It is dense energy. It requires no fermentation, only acid and enzymes. It is a packet of solar power that has already been processed by another animal. When the first ancestor tore a strip of raw flesh and swallowed it, a shock wave ran through the evolutionary trajectory of our species. Meat did not need the Great Cauldron. Meat needed a strong stomach and a long, small intestine to absorb the nutrients quickly. It was a high-octane fuel that burned hot and fast. This dietary shift was the death knell for the massive cecum. Evolution is a ruthlessly efficient economist. It operates on the principle of use it or lose it, but more accurately, if it costs too much and you don't use it, delete it. Maintaining the Great Cauldron required immense blood flow and energy to keep the tissue alive and the bacterial colony regulated. If the host was getting half its calories from scavenged meat and marrow, the cauldron was no longer pulling its weight. It became expensive overhead, and so the shrinking began. It was not a violent amputation, but a slow withering. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the genes that dictated the size of the cecum began to mutate. Those individuals with slightly smaller guts, who could run a little faster, who diverted a little more energy to their growing brains, survived longer. They raised more offspring. The blueprint of the human body was being redrawn in real time. The massive pouch began to narrow. The broad, expansive walls constricted. The universe of bacteria was squeezed into a tighter and tighter space. The fermentative fire dimmed. The belly, once a proud, distended drum, began to flatten. The center of gravity shifted upwards. The creature was standing straighter, moving faster. The era of the slow graze was replaced by the era of the persistent hunt. But nature is sentimental. It rarely throws anything away completely. It prefers to repurpose. The Great Cauldron did not vanish into thin air. It collapsed upon itself, retreating into the lining of the gut. The vast chamber became a tube. The wide entrance became a narrow stricture. The cecum, once the size of a melon, shrank to the size of a walnut, leaving behind a slender worm-like tail. This tail is what we now call the appendix. It is a ghost of anatomy. To look at the appendix is to look at a ruin. It is like stumbling upon the crumbling foundation of a once great cathedral in the middle of a modern city. You can see the outline of what it used to be. You can feel the echo of its former purpose. But the roof is gone. The stained glass is shattered, and the pews are empty. Or are they? This is where the story becomes a mystery. If the appendix were truly useless, a mere piece of trash left behind by the construction crew of Evolution, it should have disappeared entirely millions of years ago. Natural selection is brutal to waste, yet it persists. It hangs there, at the junction of the small and large intestine, a stubborn refusal to be deleted. It appears in humans, in chimps, in gorillas, in orangutans. It has been preserved through speciation events that changed almost everything else about us. Why? Perhaps the Great Cauldron did not die. Perhaps it merely went underground. Perhaps it changed its mission. As the open plains filled with new pathogens, microscopic killers that thrived in the dense populations of the troop, the body needed a new kind of defense. The fermentation vat became a bunker. The digestive engine became an immune command center. We must adjust our mental image. We are no longer looking at a massive industrial factory for digesting cellulose. We are looking at a specialized high-security vault. The appendix became a safe house. Imagine the gut of the early human as a bustling highway. Food moves through at speed. Water washes through. But the appendix is a cul-de-sac, a quiet side street protected from the main flow. In this sheltered harbor, the body continued to cultivate the most essential strains of bacteria. It was no longer about quantity, digesting pounds of leaves, but about quality, preserving the seed stock of the microbiome. It was an adaptation born of vulnerability. As we moved out of the sterile isolation of the deep forest and into the dirty communal world of the campsite and the cave, we became susceptible to waves of dysentery and cholera. These diseases kill by flushing the gut, washing away the entire lining of the intestine, stripping the body of its bacterial allies. In such a catastrophic event, the appendix serves as the Ark. When the floodwaters of infection rise, when the gut is scoured clean, the bacteria inside the appendix are safe. They are tucked away in their narrow, blind-ended tube, waiting for the storm to pass. And when the illness subsides, they emerge, recolonizing the colon, rebooting the system, saving the life of the host. So the Great Cauldron did not truly disappear. It concentrated. It distilled its essence. It went from being a furnace of energy to being a guardian of life. It traded size for strategy. But this transition left a scar. The architecture of the new organ was flawed. A narrow tube is easily blocked. A blind alley is easily trapped. By shrinking the cauldron, evolution created a bottleneck. And in the dark, warm, nutrient-rich environment of the body, a bottleneck is a dangerous thing. The very features that made it a safe house, its seclusion, its narrow opening, also made it a potential bomb. We carry this duality within us. We walk the streets of the 21st century with a piece of the Pliocene tucked in our abdomen. It is a memory of the time when we ate the forest. It is a testament to the time we learned to hunt. And it is a silent waiting risk, a reminder that evolution is not a path to perfection, but a series of compromises made in the dark, with the materials at hand. The Great Cauldron has cooled, but the embers still glow. And sometimes, if the conditions are right, they can still burst into flame. But that is the nature of our inheritance. We are built on the ruins of our ancestors, and we must live in the house that history has built, with all its hidden rooms and secret passages, hoping that the old ghosts remain at rest. But the earth is a restless sleeper, and its dreams are never static. Just as our ancestors grew comfortable in the embrace of the eternal green, trusting in the permanence of the canopy, the great wheel of climate began to turn. It was not a sudden jolt, but a slow, grinding shift in the planetary machinery, a wobble in the axis, a drift of the continents, a diversion of the ancient winds. We are leaving the golden afternoon of the Miocene now. We are drifting toward a harder, colder, drier reality. Imagine the sound of the world changing. It begins with the silence of the rain. For millions of years, the rhythm of life had been dictated by the daily deluge, the steam rising from the jungle floor. But now, the skies grew stingy. The clouds, once fat and heavy with moisture, became thin streaks of white in a pale blue sky. Slowly, imperceptibly, the humid breath of the planet dried. The air lost its thickness, its sweet, cloying weight. It became sharp, thin, and dusty. The sprawling, endless canopies that had cradled our ancestors like a mother's arms began to fracture. The great roof of the world was tearing open. Shafts of harsh, unfiltered sunlight pierced the gloom, bleaching the forest floor, drying the ancient mosses that had never known thirst. The trees, those giants of the deep time, began to die. They retreated into the valleys, clinging to the riverbanks, leaving behind vast, empty spaces. And in those spaces, a new world was born. The golden, sun-baked expanses of the savanna. It was a landscape of exposure. There were no hiding places here, no shadowy alcoves of ferns. There was only the horizon, the grass, and the terrible, unblinking eye of the sun. The menu of the earth changed with the landscape. The succulent fruits, the figs heavy with sugar, the tender shoots that required little chewing. These became rare treasures, hidden in the retreating groves like gems. The tough, fibrous leaves that had sustained the Great Cauldron receded, replaced by the hard, silica-rich blades of grass, the buried tubers, the armored nuts. In their place came the need for speed. The forest had been a world of vertical safety. The savanna was a world of horizontal danger. To eat, one had to move, one had to scavenge, one had to hunt. The calorie was no longer a gift of the tree. It was a prize to be won in a race against the hyena and the vulture. The diet shifted from the low-quality abundance of the browser to the high-stakes, high-energy gamble of the omnivore, tubers, marrow, and eventually the red, iron-rich flesh of other animals. As our ancestors stepped out of the shadows and into the harsh light of the plains, our bodies began a slow, agonizing transformation. It was a biological friction, a war between the past and the present. The massive fermentation vat, the Great Cauldron, that had been the center of our survival, the engine of our existence, suddenly became a burden. Picture an ancestor. Let us call him Homo habilis, or perhaps an early upright wanderer, trying to navigate this new, terrifying stage. He is not yet a runner. He still carries the heavy, pot-bellied silhouette of the grazer. He carries the weight of the massive cecum, a sack of fluid and bacteria weighing several pounds, slung low in his abdomen. In the trees, this weight was supported by the branch he sat on. It was a counterbalance. But out here, on two legs, under the relentless sun, it is a dead weight. It drags on the spine. It shifts the center of gravity. It retains heat in a body that is already struggling to cool itself without the shade of the canopy. The savanna demands efficiency. It is a landscape of predators, the saber-toothed cats, the hunting dogs, the eagles that darken the sun. Survival is no longer about sitting still and processing fiber for 8 hours a day. It is about covering distance. It is about the persistence hunt. It is about walking 10 miles to find a waterhole. It is about sprinting to a rock shelter before the storm breaks. In this high-stakes arena, the Great Cauldron was an anchor. It slowed the stride. It consumed vast amounts of blood and energy to maintain its bacterial colonies. Energy that was desperately needed by the muscles to run, and increasingly, by the brain to plan. The body was running a metabolic deficit. It could not afford to keep a massive factory for digesting leaves when there were no leaves to digest. The expensive tissue of the gut was competing with the expensive tissue of the expanding mind. And so, evolution, the ruthless sculptor, picked up its chisel. It is a mistake to think of evolution as a conscious force, a designer sketching on a pad. It is a process of subtraction. It is the silence of those who did not make it. It is the story of the ancestors who were too heavy, too slow, too committed to the old ways. They were caught by the leopards in the tall grass. They died of heat stroke in the midday sun, their massive guts generating too much internal heat. Their genes, carrying the instructions for the massive cecum, were extinguished from the river of life. But those who were born with a mutation, a subtle shift in the code of life that resulted in a slightly smaller gut, a slightly shorter intestine, found themselves with a razor-thin advantage. They were lighter. They needed less food to fill their bellies. They could run a little farther, regulate their temperature a little better. They survived the drought. They survived the hunt. They mated. They passed on the code for a smaller gut to their children. Over hundreds of thousands of years, a mere blink in the eye of the cosmos, the Great Cauldron began to shrink. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, written in the hunger pangs of 1,000 generations. The large digesting pouch narrowed. The wide entrance, once open like a cave mouth, constricted. The tissue withered and retreated, pulling back from the abdominal wall, folding in on itself. This was the great trade-off of humanity. We traded digestion for cognition. We traded the ability to eat the forest for the ability to understand the forest. As the gut shrank, it freed up energy, metabolic currency, that was immediately diverted to the growing brain. We could only afford our large, hungry brains because we gave up our large, hungry guts. We became smarter because we stopped being grazers. We became human because we let the cauldron die. But the transition was not clean. Nature rarely erases its sketches completely. It leaves behind the lines, the smudges, the remnants of the old design. The cecum did not disappear. It remained as a vestige, a ghost of the Great Cauldron. The appendix is the memory of this shrinkage. It is the bottom of the sack, the cul-de-sac left over when the highway was narrowed. It is the ruins of the factory, overgrown but still standing. Imagine the nights of this transition era. The ancestor lies by a small, flickering fire, a new technology, a new way to pre-digest food, rendering the Great Cauldron even more obsolete. The firelight dances on his face, revealing a brow that is less heavy, a jaw that is less jutting. He shivers in the cooling air of the Pleistocene night. He feels a phantom hunger, a craving for bulk that his smaller stomach can no longer accommodate. His body is changing. His jaw is shrinking. His teeth are becoming smaller. He is becoming something new. He eats a piece of roasted meat, stripped from the bone of a gazelle. It is rich, dense, satisfying. It sits light in the stomach. The internal fermenters are confused. There is no fiber to break down. The bacteria in the shrinking cecum grow quiet. The vast population that once thrived there is dwindling, retreating into the final stronghold of the appendix. The wind howls across the open steppe, carrying the scent of mammoth and horse. The silence of the primeval forest is gone, replaced by the vast, terrifying silence of the stars. The ancestor touches his abdomen. The great distension is gone. The belly is flatter, harder. The internal fire of fermentation has dimmed, replaced by the external fire of the hearth. He is lighter, yes. He is faster, yes. But he is also more vulnerable. He has cut his ties with the plant kingdom. He is now dependent on his wits and his luck. The age of the grazer had ended. The symbiotic pact with the bacteria was being rewritten. We were no longer the passive vessels for the forest to digest itself. We were becoming the active agents, the hunters, the tool makers. The appendix, now a small worm-like tube, sat in the dark, waiting. It was no longer the engine room. It had become a closet, a small, forgotten room in the mansion of the body, where the old gods, the ancient bacteria, were hiding, waiting for their new purpose to be revealed. The withering of the woods was the birth of the human. We are the children of the drought. We are the survivors of the shrinkage. And every time we look at the appendix, that small, enigmatic finger of tissue, we are looking at the price of our admission to the modern world. It is the receipt for our brain, paid for in the currency of the gut, signed in the dust of the dying forest. And so, the wheel turned. The ice began to creep down from the poles. The world grew harder still. The lush, forgiving Eden was gone forever. And the trait, the silent witness, held its breath, carried forward into the cold, unknown future, a tiny capsule of the past sealed within the changing flesh of the future. The cauldron was broken, but the safe house was just closing its doors. The dust of the Pliocene has settled. The great drying of the world has remodeled the continents, turning the endless, steaming jungles into the patchwork quilt of savanna and scrubland that we recognize in the fossil record. The grand biological machinery of the ancestors, the massive fermenting bellies that once processed the fibrous wealth of the canopy, has been dismantled by the ruthless efficiency of natural selection. The body has tightened. The waist has narrowed. The human form has emerged from the chrysalis of the great ape, standing tall, lean, and hungry against the horizon of a new world. But as we gaze into the abdominal cavity of this new creature, this Homo erectus, this Homo sapiens, we find something that does not seem to fit. There, tucked away in the lower right quadrant of the abdomen, nestled beneath the junction where the small intestine pours its contents into the large, lies a curiosity. It is a small, pale, worm-like tube. It hangs from the cecum like a forgotten bookmark in a heavy tome of history. It is a biological afterthought. It is the appendix. For centuries of human thought, this small appendage has been the subject of profound confusion and dismissal. When the early anatomists, working by the flicker of tallow candles in the dark basements of Renaissance Europe, first peeled back the layers of the human form. They marveled at the obvious utility of the organs they found. They saw the heart, a muscular pump that clearly drove the river of blood. They saw the lungs, great bellows that rose and fell with the breath of life. They saw the stomach, a churning acid bath. Every gear in the machine seemed to have a purpose, a reason for being there, a job to do in the economy of life. But then, their scalpels would uncover this. A thin, blind-ended tube, perhaps the length of a finger, often no thicker than a quill. It appeared to be deflated, empty, a hollow remnant of something that had once been grand. It did not pulse. It did not secrete bile. It did not grind food. It simply sat there in the dark warmth of the abdomen, a blind alley with no apparent exit, a cul-de-sac in the complex highway of the body. To the rational minds of the Enlightenment, and to the pragmatic scientists of the Victorian age, it was offensive in its uselessness. It was labeled a vestige. It was called a mistake. It was dismissed as a piece of biological debris left behind by the receding tide of our history, like a piece of driftwood stranded on the beach after the ocean has pulled away. Imagine, if you will, the human body as a sprawling ancient mansion. It is a house that has been added to, renovated, and remodeled over millions of years. There are the grand ballrooms of the brain, the bustling kitchens of the liver, the pump rooms of the heart. But the appendix? The appendix is a forgotten room in the basement. It is a small antechamber where the door has been sealed over, the windows bricked up, and the furniture draped in heavy white dust sheets. The current inhabitants of the house, the modern human consciousness, walk past this door every day without knowing what lies inside. We assume it is empty. We assume it is merely a structural quirk, a leftover from the original floor plan that the architects forgot to demolish. This perception of the appendix as a hollow remnant became the dominant narrative of our biology. Charles Darwin himself, the great observer of life's unfolding, looked upon this organ and saw a shadow of the past. To him, and to those who followed, it was a ruined monument to our herbivorous ancestors. Just as the ruins of Stonehenge hint at a civilization that once worshipped there, the appendix hinted at a time when we were great fermenters of leaves. But Stonehenge is a ruin. It no longer functions as a temple. And so, it was believed, the appendix no longer functioned as an organ. It was a ghost. But let us pause and consider the sheer improbability of this ghost. Let us step out of the anatomy lab and back into the raw, unforgiving reality of the Pleistocene wilderness. Let us descend into the deep time where the currency of survival is calculated in the strictest possible terms. Evolution is not a sentimental hoarder. It does not keep heirlooms for the sake of nostalgia. It is a ruthlessly efficient accountant. Every inch of tissue in the human body requires payment. It demands oxygen. It demands blood flow. It demands nutrients to repair its cells and energy to maintain its temperature. In the harsh mathematics of survival, during the freezing winters of the Ice Age or the blistering droughts of the African Rift, a wasted calorie can mean the difference between living to see the sunrise and returning to the dust. A body that carries useless weight is a body that is less likely to survive. If the appendix were truly a hollow remnant, a piece of junk DNA-made flesh, natural selection should have aggressively deleted it. The individuals born with smaller withered appendices, or no appendix at all, should have had a metabolic advantage. They should have been slightly more efficient, slightly lighter, slightly less prone to infection. Over the span of 2 million years, thousands upon thousands of generations, this useless tube should have vanished completely, smoothed over like a scar that fades with time. And yet, it remains. It is found in the first humans who walked out of Africa. It is found in the Neanderthals who braved the glacial winds of Europe. It is found in the modern office worker sitting under fluorescent lights. Despite the immense pressure to streamline the body, despite the great shrinking of the gut, this small, hollow finger has persisted. It has clung to the cecum with a stubborn tenacity that defies the label of mistake. To understand the weight of this mystery, we must look not just at the metabolic cost of keeping the appendix, but at the terrible risk it poses. For this useless organ is not merely passive, it is volatile. It is a ticking time bomb sewn into the lining of the gut. Transport your mind back 20,000 years. The world is in the grip of the last glacial maximum. The landscape is a vast rolling tundra of lichens and dwarf willows, swept by winds that cut like obsidian knives. A small band of hunter-gatherers is moving across the snow, following the migration of the reindeer herds. They are lean, hardened survivors, their lives a constant negotiation with the cold. Among them is a young man, a hunter in the prime of his life. He is strong, his senses sharp, his knowledge of the ice intimate and profound. He is the future of his tribe, a provider, a protector. But one evening, as the group huddles around the fire fueled by precious dried dung and bones, he feels a dull, gnawing ache near his navel. He rubs his stomach, thinking perhaps it is a bad piece of meat or a spirit of sickness passing through. But the ache does not pass. Over the next day, it migrates. It moves like a slow, burrowing worm, settling deep in the lower right side of his abdomen. The pain sharpens. It transforms from a dull ache into a piercing, white-hot agony that steals his breath. He cannot walk upright. He curls into a fetal position on the furs, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing air. His tribe watches with helpless fear. The shaman may rattle bones, may offer herbs, may chant the songs of healing, but the enemy is within. Deep inside the hunter's body, the hollow remnant has betrayed him. The narrow opening of the appendix has become blocked, perhaps by a small seed, a parasite, or a swelling of the lymph tissue. The forgotten room is now a prison. The bacteria trapped inside, unable to escape into the gut, are multiplying uncontrollably. The pressure builds. The walls of the appendix stretch, inflame, and begin to die. In a world without steel scalpels, without sterile operating theaters, without antibiotics, this is a catastrophe. The hunter's fever spikes. His body fights with everything it has, sending waves of white blood cells to the siege, but the blockage is absolute. And then, the catastrophic moment, the rupture. The appendix bursts, spilling its toxic, bacteria-laden contents into the pristine, sterile cavity of the abdomen. Peritonitis sets in. The infection spreads like a wildfire across the prairies of his internal organs. Within days, the hunter is dead. A vibrant, healthy link in the chain of generations has been broken, not by a saber-toothed cat, not by a fall from a cliff, not by starvation, but by a useless tube the size of a finger. This tragedy has played out millions of times in our history. It has claimed children, elders, kings, and wanderers. It is a silent reaper that strikes without warning. This is the evolutionary duality of the appendix. It is a structure that seems to offer no benefit, yet carries a lethal cost. In biological terms, this is known as a maladaptation, a trait that lowers the organism's fitness. By all the laws of Darwinian logic, the appendix should have been the first thing to go. The genes that build this trap should have been weeded out by the sheer mortality rate of appendicitis. So why are we still born with it? Why does the code of life continue to construct this blind alley in the gut of every single human being? The persistence of the appendix in the face of such danger is one of the great paradoxes of anthropology. It forces us to reconsider what we think we know about the body. It forces us to look at the hollow remnant and ask, is it truly hollow, or is it simply full of something we cannot see? Consider the silence of the organ. In the cacophony of the digestive tract, where the stomach churns and the intestines contract in powerful rhythmic waves, the appendix is still. It sits in a quiet backwater. But in biology, stillness is rarely synonymous with death. Often, stillness is a requirement for a different kind of work. Think of the stillness of a library compared to the noise of a factory. The factory produces goods. The library preserves knowledge. Perhaps the appendix is not a factory. Perhaps it was never meant to churn or digest. As we drifted away from the Green Cathedral, as the heavy machinery of the cecum withered away, the body did not simply discard the leftover tissue. Nature is a scavenger. It reuses materials. The forgotten room was repurposed. The dust sheets were pulled off, not to reveal a machine, but to reveal a sanctuary. We must imagine the interior of the appendix not as a dead space, but as a specialized environment. The walls of this tube are lined with a unique architecture. If you were to look at a cross-section of the appendix under a microscope, you would see that it is not just a flap of skin. It is thick with lymphoid tissue, the same kind of tissue found in the tonsils and the thymus. It is rich in immune cells, the soldiers of the body's defense system. This is our first clue that the remnant is not merely a ghost. It is a garrison. Furthermore, the shape of the appendix, that narrow, worm-like restrictiveness that makes it so prone to blockage, might actually be its primary feature. In the open ocean of the colon, the flow of material is constant. It is a rushing river of food, water, and bacteria. It is chaotic, but the appendix is a harbor. Its narrow mouth restricts the flow, creating a secluded, protected cove. In this cove, the water is calm. The currents of the gut do not reach here. And in this calm, something waits. For decades, we looked at the appendix and saw only the absence of digestion. We defined it by what it didn't do. It didn't break down cellulose. It didn't absorb nutrients. It didn't move. But the history of science is often the history of realizing that our definitions were too small. We were like deaf men looking at a musical instrument and declaring it useless because it made no visual product. We were judging the appendix by the standards of the stomach. But the body is vaster and more complex than a simple assembly line of fuel. The body is an ecosystem. It is a planet inhabited by trillions of foreign organisms. We are beginning to understand that the self is actually a partnership between the human cells and the microbial clouds that live within us. And in this partnership, the appendix plays a role that is both ancient and desperate. It is waiting. It is waiting for the disaster. It is waiting for the moment when the balance of the ecosystem collapses. It is waiting for the withering of the woods to happen not in the outside world, but inside the microcosm of the gut. Picture the appendix now, not as a mistake, but as a safe. A biological safety deposit box. It is tucked away, deep in the core of the body, protected by layers of muscle and fat, isolated from the main thoroughfare of the intestine. It is small, yes. It is unobtrusive. But inside, it holds a treasure more valuable than gold to a prehistoric human. It holds the seed stock of life. The Hollow Remnant is actually a crowded bunker. It is lined with a sticky, protective biofilm, a mucus shield that the body generates to create a VIP lounge for bacteria. Here, the beneficial microbes, the ones that help us digest, the ones that synthesize vitamins, the ones that keep the dangerous pathogens at bay, are invited to stay. They are fed. They are protected from the immune system's patrols. They are kept in reserve. The silence of the appendix is the silence of a sentry in the night. It is the silence of a seed waiting in the dry earth for the rain. It is a quietude born of purpose. While the rest of the body is busy running, hunting, thinking, and digesting, the appendix sits in its dark corner, holding on to the backup files of the microbiome. It is the hard drive of the gut. This reframing changes everything. If the appendix is a safe house, then the risk of appendicitis, the ticking time bomb, is the premium we pay for this insurance policy. Nature, in its cold calculus, has decided that the risk of the organ bursting is outweighed by the benefit of having a reset button for the gut. It is better to risk the death of a few individuals from inflammation than to risk the death of the entire species from the scourges of dysentery and plague that would wipe out our internal flora completely. And so, the Hollow Remnant is not a vestige of the past, but a bridge to the future. It is a testament to the fact that we have never truly left the microbial world behind. We may have walked out of the forest, we may have built cities of stone and steel, we may have learned to split the atom, but deep inside, we are still guardians of a microscopic garden. We still carry the ancient responsibility of the host. As the generations faded into dust, as the glaciers advanced and retreated, as the languages of men rose and fell, the appendix remained. It was passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son, a silent inheritance. It survived the genetic drift. It survived the bottleneck of Toba. It survived the starvation of the winters. It persisted because, in the grand, dangerous theater of the Paleolithic world, you needed a backup plan. You needed a place to hide the fire when the storm winds blew. The forgotten room in the mansion was never empty. It was simply locked. And inside, the tiny, invisible inhabitants were sleeping, waiting for the signal, waiting for the moment when the great house of the body would be shaken to its foundations, and they would be called upon to emerge and rebuild the world. The mystery of the appendix is the mystery of life's resilience. It is a story of how the smallest, most unassuming parts of us can hold the greatest power. It teaches us humility. It teaches us that in the biography of the body, there are no blank pages, only pages written in ink we have not yet learned to read. The worm-like tube is not a remnant of what we were. It is a secret weapon for what we had to become. It is the silent, waiting guardian of the self. And as we prepare to peer deeper into this secret garden, to unlock the doors of the safe house and see the microscopic allies in action, we must let go of our modern arrogance. We must look at the appendix with the same awe we reserve for the eye or the brain. For in its hollow center, it holds the difference between life and death. The tide of history did not leave it behind. The tide of history flows through it, a quiet, protective eddy in the river of time. Let the fire die down to glowing embers. Let the cold wind of the Pleistocene night scratch against the limestone walls of the cave, a distant and toothless threat. We have traveled far in our journey through the geography of the human form. walking the long road from the canopy of the Miocene forest to the open, wind-swept savannas. We have watched the great fermentation vat of our ancestors wither and shrink, sacrificing its bulk so that the mind could expand. We have seen the Great Cauldron collapse into the Hollow Remnant. But now, as the shadows lengthen and the breathing of the clan slows to the rhythm of sleep, we must journey inward. We must leave the macrocosm of the savanna, the world of lions, lightning, and stone tools, and descend into the microcosm. We are entering the darkness of the gut. Here, in the warm, wet interior of the human body, where the eye cannot see and the sun has never shone, a microscopic drama unfolds that is as complex and ancient as the movement of the stars. For centuries, we believed this withered pouch, this worm-like appendage, was a ghost town, a ruin left abandoned by the retreating tides of evolution. We thought it was empty. But in the biography of the body, emptiness is rarely what it seems. Silence is not the absence of life. Often, it is the sound of holding one's breath. We now know that this withered pouch was never truly empty. As the heavy machinery of digestion moved away, surrendering its role to the small intestine and the cooking fire, the appendix repurposed itself into something far more subtle, far more profound, and infinitely more beautiful. It became a sanctuary. To understand this transformation, you must shift your perspective of the human body. We tend to think of ourselves as singular entities, one mind, one soul, one flesh. But biologically, we are planets. We are walking ecosystems, vast, diverse continents inhabited by trillions of tiny lives. These are the microbiota, the bacteria, the archaea, the fungi that colonize the surfaces of our skin and the deep, twisting caverns of our digestive tract. They are not invaders. They are the old friends. They are the ancient travelers who boarded the Ark of our biology when we were still swimming in the primordial oceans, and they have never left. In the chaotic, rushing thoroughfare of the large intestine, life for these microscopic citizens is dangerous. The colon is a wild river. It is a place of constant movement, where the waste of the day is churned, dehydrated, and pushed relentlessly toward the exit. It is a place of chemical warfare, where transient bacteria from the outside world, the invaders on a dirty piece of meat, the pathogens in a cup of stagnant water, battle for supremacy. It is a noisy, turbulent metropolis. But tucked away from this chaos, situated just off the main highway like a hidden monastery in the mountains, lies the appendix. Picture it as a secret garden. Imagine a fortified library or a hidden safe house constructed with the frantic genius of natural selection. It is a cul-de-sac, a blind alley where the rushing river does not flow. Here, the currents slow down. The noise of the digestion fades. The turbulence of the peristaltic waves, the muscular contractions that squeeze the gut, dampens into a gentle rhythmic pulse. In this secluded biological cove, the body has done something remarkable. It has curated a collection. It is here that the body keeps its most valuable inhabitants, the beneficial bacteria. These are the heirlooms of our internal world. They are the strains that have co-evolved with us for millions of years, the ones that learn to speak the chemical language of our immune system. They are the alchemists that turn the fiber we cannot digest into the vitamins we need to survive. They are the peacekeepers that coat the lining of the gut, preventing the walls from leaking, stopping the enemies from breaching the gates. In the appendix, these chosen few are granted asylum. The environment is engineered for their comfort. It is dark, anaerobic, and rich in the specific nutrients they require. It is a VIP lounge in the nightclub of the body, but it is also a fortress. The walls of this secret garden are lined with a unique and shimmering substance. Science calls it a biofilm, but in the poetic history of our species, we might call it a veil of protection. It is a sticky, gelatinous matrix, a gossamer shield woven from sugars and proteins. This biofilm covers the bacterial colonies in the appendix like a warm blanket. It is a physical barrier that the rushing river of the large intestine cannot breach. It prevents the good bacteria from being washed away during the daily purges of digestion. It protects them from the immune system's roving patrols, which might otherwise mistake them for enemies. Imagine the texture of this place. It is soft, yielding, yet resilient. The walls of the appendix are not smooth. They are folded, creating deep crypts and valleys where the bacteria can nestle, multiplying in the safety of the dark. It is a nursery. It is a seed bank. Just as we store the seeds of wheat and corn in the frozen vaults of Svalbard to protect them from the apocalypse, the human body stores the seeds of its internal ecosystem in the appendix. This adaptation speaks of a world that was fraught with danger. Why would the body need a safe house? Why would it expend precious energy to build a sanctuary and maintain a standing army of bacteria that do no immediate work? The answer lies in the history of our suffering. Cast your mind back to the late Pleistocene. The world is a place of raw, unfiltered biological hazard. Our ancestors did not drink from tap water treated with chlorine. They drank from water holes shared with hippos and hyenas. They did not eat meat wrapped in plastic. They ate the scavenged carcasses of the savannah or meat that had hung in the heat of the day. They lived in a world where the microscopic threat was as deadly as the saber-toothed cat. Dysentery, cholera, salmonella. These were the scourges of the Paleolithic. They were the invisible fires that burned through the gut. When such an infection strikes, the body's response is violent and absolute. It initiates a purge. The gut flushes itself. Massive amounts of water are dumped into the intestines to wash the poison out. It is a biological flood, a Noah's Ark scenario in reverse. Everything must go. The bad bacteria, the toxins, the food, and tragically, the good bacteria, the old friends, are all swept away in the torrent of diarrhea. In a body without an appendix, this purge is a Pyrrhic victory. The enemy is gone, yes, but the land is left barren. The gut is scorched earth. The complex, delicate rainforest of the microbiome has been clear-cut. Without these beneficial bacteria, the human is left vulnerable. They cannot digest food properly. They cannot synthesize vitamin K. Worse, the empty walls of the gut are now open territory, a vacant lot waiting for the next weed, the next pathogen, to take root. Recovery is slow, dangerous, and often fatal. But for the ancestor with the secret garden, the story is different. While the storm rages in the main channel of the gut, while the flood waters scour the colon clean, the appendix remains secure. The narrow opening, the position off to the side, and the protective biofilm shield the inhabitants within. The safe house is locked down. The ancient friends sit tight in their bunker, waiting for the all-clear signal. They are the survivors. They are the remnant, and when the illness passes, when the purge is over and the gut is silent and empty, the appendix opens its doors. This is the moment of the living backup drive. In a slow, microscopic migration, the bacteria swarm out of the appendix. They move like a relief army entering a besieged city. They travel down the length of the large intestine, recolonizing the walls, replanting the garden. They occupy the empty niches before the enemy can return. They reboot the system. This is not a medical textbook description. This is an epic of survival. It is the story of how we survived the dirty, dangerous childhood of our species. The appendix was our insurance policy. It was the restart button on the machine of life. It allowed our ancestors to survive infections that should have killed them, to bounce back from poisoning, to continue the long trek across the continents. Consider the wisdom of this architecture. We often think of intelligence as something that happens in the brain, a firing of neurons and sparks of electricity. But there is a deep, quiet intelligence in the tissues themselves. The gut knows. The appendix knows. It does not think in words, but in chemical signals and evolutionary memories. It knows that the world is cyclical, that times of plenty are followed by times of famine, and that times of health are followed by times of plague. So, while the rest of the body engaged in the noisy business of living, the hunting of the mammoth, the chipping of the flint, the crying of the child, the laughing by the fire, the appendix maintained this quiet vigil. It did not seek glory. It did not ask for attention. It simply held the line. It was the keeper of the flame, the guardian of the microscopic soul. Let us imagine a specific moment in this deep history. It is the Neolithic Revolution. The ice has retreated. The ancestors have stopped wandering and have begun to build walls of mud and stone. They are living in close proximity to their animals. The goats, the pigs, the cattle. The village is crowded. The water supply is easily contaminated. It is a breeding ground for new and terrible diseases. A child in the village falls ill. The sickness sweeps through the huts, a violent purging of the gut. For days, the village is quiet, save for the sounds of suffering. But look at the child who survives. Look at the young girl who, a week later, is pale but standing, eating a bowl of gruel, her strength returning. Deep inside her, the secret garden has opened. The backup drive has engaged. The bacteria, preserved in the appendix of her ancestors, preserved through the ice ages and the droughts, are now spreading through her body, knitting the world back together, cell by microscopic cell. She lives because she carried the sanctuary within her. She lives to become a mother, to pass on her genes, and with them, the blueprint for this tiny, misunderstood organ. She passes on the safe house. We carry this legacy today. In the sterile canyons of our modern cities, we may feel disconnected from this raw struggle. We have antibiotics. We have sanitation. We have refrigeration. The appendix seems to have lost its primary job. The safe house is rarely called upon to save us from cholera in the suburbs. And so it sits there, often causing more trouble than it solves. A soldier without a war. But in the silence of the night, when you are asleep and your conscious mind has drifted away, the secret garden is still there. It is still curating its collection. It is still wrapping its ancient friends in a blanket of biofilm. It is still waiting. It is a biological memory of a time when the world was wilder, when survival hung by a thread, and when the smallest, quietest room in the house was the one that held the key to the future. This is the beauty of the biography of the body. It is a story of layers. We are not just modern humans. We are palimpsests, written over again and again. The appendix is a verse from an older chapter, a poem about resilience written in the language of tissue and bacteria. As we visualize this secluded biological cul-de-sac, let us treat it with a new respect. It is not a vestige of a grass eater. It is the invention of a survivor. It is a testament to the fact that in the game of evolution, defense is just as important as offense. It is not enough to be strong, one must also be resilient. One must have a backup plan. The rushing river of modern life flows on. We bombard our guts with processed foods, with stress, with chemicals our ancestors never knew. And yet, the appendix persists. It holds the seeds of our internal ecosystem safe, a living backup drive of the microbial soul, waiting for the moment it might be needed again. For who knows what the future holds? The wheel of climate turns. The world changes. And perhaps one day, the secret garden will once again be the difference between the silence of extinction and the continued song of life. So tonight, acknowledge the guardian within. Picture the tiny, warm sanctuary in the dark of your abdomen. It is quiet. It is peaceful. It is the keeper of the old friends, and it is watching over you, as it watched over the hunter on the tundra and the gatherer in the forest, a silent witness to the enduring miracle of your own survival. The wind shifts now. We leave behind the solitude of the ancient hunter, standing alone against the vast backdrop of the Pleistocene tundra, and we move forward in time. The great ice sheets are retreating, pulling back toward the poles like a white tide leaving the shore. The earth is warming. The seasons are settling into the rhythms we recognize today. The Green Cathedral has gone, and the open savanna has been crossed. Now, a new sound rises from the valleys and the riverbanks of the world. It is not the call of the wild bird, nor the roar of the lion, but the sound of the human voice multiplied. We are entering the Neolithic. The wandering has stopped. For millions of years, the golden rule of survival was movement. To stay in one place was to starve or to be hunted. But now, a strange new idea has taken root in the mind of the species, the idea of home. We see the first walls rising from the mud of the Mesopotamia, the first fences woven from thorn bushes in the Levant, the first fires that do not move with the dawn. Humanity is gathering. The tribes are merging. The solitary bands are coalescing into the teeming, breathing organism of the village, and later, the city. But with this gathering, with this huddled warmth of civilization, came a shadow. We did not know it then. But in our desire to conquer the earth, to tame the wild grasses into wheat and barley, to corral the wild goats into pens, we were building a trap for ourselves. We were creating the perfect breeding ground for an invisible enemy. The wide open air of the plains, where the sun sterilized the earth and the wind blew away the dust of our passing, was replaced by the stagnant air of the settlement. The need for a sanctuary, for that secret garden hidden within the appendix, became violently apparent in this new world. For the first time in history, humans were living in close proximity to their own waste. We were living with our animals, breathing their breath, stepping in their filth, drinking from water sources that did not flow fast enough to wash away the sins of the city. And in this dark, damp intimacy, the ancient microscopic world saw an opportunity. Enter the invisible enemies, the waterborne destroyers, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, the sweeping plagues that do not attack with claws or teeth, but with a silent, molecular infiltration. They are the scourge of the plains. They are the bacteria that thrive in the crowd, that leap from host to host in the invisible circle of contamination that defined early human civilization. Imagine the dawn of a summer day in one of these first settlements, perhaps Jericho or Satalhoyuk. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, of wood smoke, of roasting meat, and the pungent, unmistakable scent of latrines. The river, once a pristine ribbon of blue cutting through the desert, is now muddy and slow, burdened by the needs of 1,000 people. A woman dips a clay pot into the water. The sun catches the ripples. It looks cool, refreshing. She does not see the millions of tiny rod-shaped organisms swirling in the liquid. She does not see the Vibrio cholerae or the Shigella. She carries the pot back to her family. She drinks. Her children drink. And so the invasion begins. The stomach, that first line of defense, tries to fight. Its acid bath is formidable, but these enemies are numerous, and they are evolved to survive the gauntlet. They slip past the pyloric sphincter, they enter the small intestine, and there they begin their terrible work. They latch onto the walls of the gut. They release toxins that are ancient chemical keys, unlocking the cells of the lining, tricking the body into turning against itself. What follows is one of the most violent biological reactions the human body can endure. It is the Great Purge. The body, realizing it has been breached, realizing that the very walls of its fortress are being compromised, initiates a scorched earth protocol. It screams, chemically, for water. It reverses the flow of absorption. Instead of pulling nutrients and fluids from the food, the intestine begins to dump water into the channel. The digestive system, usually a rhythmic, slow-moving river of nourishment, turns into a rushing torrent of destruction. Picture the devastation of a flash flood in a narrow canyon. The water rises instantly, tearing up trees, smashing boulders, scouring the earth down to the bedrock. This is what happens inside the infected host. The volume of fluid is catastrophic. The body is trying to wash the invader out, to flush the system with such force that no pathogen can hold its grip. It is a desperate, primitive defense. It is the body saying, "I will sacrifice everything to get this out." And everything means everything. In the violence of this purge, the innocent are swept away with the guilty. The old friends, the trillions of beneficial bacteria that we spent millions of years cultivating in the secret garden, are caught in the flood. The carefully balanced ecosystem of the gut, the rainforest of the microbiome, is decimated. The biofilm is stripped from the walls. The nutrients that were meant to fuel the heart and the brain are expelled into the dust of the hut floor. Imagine the devastation of a forest fire, raging uncontrolled through a pristine woodland. The flames consume the canopy, the undergrowth, the mosses, the very soil itself. When the fire passes, what is left? A landscape of ash. A silence that is profound and terrifying. The birds are gone. The insects are gone. The green hum of life has been extinguished. This is the internal landscape of the human being in the throes of dysentery. The gut is wiped clean. It is a moment of profound biological silence. The Great Cauldron is empty. The metabolic engine has stalled. The host lies on a mat of woven reeds, shivering, pale, their eyes sunken. They are hollowed out. They are dehydrated, yes, but they are also ecologically bankrupt. In the ancient world, before the advent of intravenous fluids and antibiotics, this moment was often the end of the story. The fire of infection would burn out the life of the host, not just through dehydration, but through starvation amidst plenty. Even if the person survived the initial purge, even if the pathogen was successfully flushed out, the body was left defenseless. Consider the vulnerability of the survivor. The gut is a tube designed to absorb nutrients, but it can only do so effectively with the help of its microbial partners. Without the bacteria to break down complex carbohydrates, without the flora to synthesize vitamins, the food simply passes through. The survivor eats, but cannot be fed. They are like a car with a full tank of gas but no spark plugs. Furthermore, the empty lot of the sterilized gut is a dangerous vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. Without the good bacteria to occupy the real estate of the colon, the walls are open for the next wave of intruders. A fungal infection, a second bacterial attack, could take root instantly, finding no resistance. This was the desolate winter within the abdomen. This was the bottleneck of the Neolithic. We built cities, and the cities tried to kill us. We gathered together, and the gathering became a graveyard. But for those who carried the silent witness, the story was far from over. Deep in the lower right quadrant of the suffering ancestor, amidst the chaos of the rushing river, the appendix held firm. Let us zoom in on this tiny, worm-like structure during the height of the storm. The rest of the colon is in spasms. The walls are convulsing. The fluid is roaring past at breakneck speed. But the entrance to the appendix is narrow, a tight, muscular ring, and inside, the air is still. The secret garden is in lockdown. The unique shape of the appendix, that blind-ended cul-de-sac that seemed so useless to the anatomists of the Enlightenment, is now revealed as a masterstroke of hydrodynamic engineering. Because it is a dead-end street, the current of the purge does not flow through it. It flows past it. The pressure differential keeps the contents of the appendix relatively stable. The biofilm, that thick, sticky shield we spoke of, acts like the blast doors of a bunker. Inside, the seed stock is safe. The beneficial bacteria, the Bacteroides, the firmicutes, the ancient lineages handed down from mother to child, are huddled together. They are protected from the toxins raging outside. They are protected from the sheer mechanical force of the flush. They are the survivors in the Ark, hearing the rain of the flood drumming on the roof, waiting for the waters to recede. This is the evolutionary duality of the trait in its sharpest relief. Yes, the appendix carries the risk of inflammation, the ticking time bomb of appendicitis. But in the context of the scourge of the plains, that risk was a price worth paying. The individual who had no appendix, or a wide, open appendix that washed out easily, died during the plagues. They could not reboot. They withered away in the post-infection winter, unable to digest, unable to recover. Their lineage ended in the dust of the early village. But the individual with the tight, narrow, protected appendix survived. They endured the purge. And when the sickness passed, they had a secret weapon that allowed them to rise again. Let us return to the bedside of our Neolithic ancestor. The fever has broken. The terrible rushing of the gut has ceased. The body is weak, a husk of its former self. The silence in the room is mirrored by the silence in the abdomen. But then, a subtle shift occurs. The lockdown ends. Slowly, tentatively, the safe house opens its doors. The biofilm softens. The bacteria, sensing the change in chemical signals, the drop in inflammation, the return of stability, begin to move. They migrate out of the narrow tube of the appendix. They are few at first, a microscopic scouting party entering the devastated wasteland of the colon. They find the walls stripped bare. They find the nutrients waiting, and they begin to multiply. Bacteria can double their population in 20 minutes. From the reservoir of the appendix, a wave of life begins to spread. It moves down the length of the large intestine, covering the scorched earth with new green growth. They re-establish the barrier. They begin to produce the short-chain fatty acids that feed the cells of the gut lining, healing the damage caused by the toxins. This is the resurrection. It is not a miracle of magic, it is a miracle of biology. Within days, the internal ecosystem is restored. The forest grows back faster than any forest on Earth. The host eats a piece of flatbread, and this time, the nutrients are caught. The energy returns to the blood. The color returns to the cheeks. The ancestor stands up, walks to the doorway of the hut, and looks out at the sun rising over the grazing goats. They have survived the scourge. They have walked through the fire and come out the other side, carrying the seeds of their own renewal. This cycle, infection, purge, survival, recolonization, played out millions of times over the last 10,000 years. It was the rhythm of history. Every time a plague swept through Rome or Athens or the camps of the Mongols, the appendix was there, working in the dark. It was the silent hero of the pre-antibiotic age. It was the reason that dysentery, while a terrible killer, did not wipe out the human race entirely. We look back at these times with horror, from the safety of our sanitized world. We have broken the cycle of the scourge with sewage systems and water treatment plants. We have made the safe house less critical for daily survival. But the memory of those days is carved into our anatomy. The appendix is a monument to the time when a drink of water could be a death sentence, and when the only thing standing between us and the void was a tiny worm-like tube holding on to the past. The scourge of the plains taught our bodies a hard lesson, that invulnerability is impossible, but resilience is everything. The forest can be burned, but if the seeds are safe, the forest will return. And so, the trait persisted. The useless organ was selected for again and again by the cruel hand of the cholera and the ruthless logic of the dysentery. It was the anchor that held the ship when the storm tried to blow it out to sea. As night falls over the Neolithic village, the sounds of life continue. The dogs bark, the babies cry, the fires crackle, and deep inside the bellies of the sleepers, the appendix waits. It has done its work for some. It waits to work for others. It is the sentinel of the second stomach, the guardian of the inner flame. The invisible enemies are still out there, lurking in the water, waiting for a mistake. But the body is ready. The safe house is secure. The story of survival continues, written in the invisible ink of the microbiome, deep in the dark, warm silence of the gut. The storm has passed. In the physical world, the storm might have been a literal tempest, a howling gale tearing across the steppes of the Pleistocene, burying the mammoth trails in drifts of white powder. But in the internal world, the storm was the silent, violent catastrophe of infection. We have witnessed the purge. We have seen the scourge of the plains sweep through the canyons of the gut, a flood of biological necessity that washed away the enemy but left the landscape barren. Now, a profound silence settles over the body. Imagine the aftermath of a great flood in a river valley. The rushing waters have receded, leaving behind a world stripped of its familiar features. The trees are gone, the topsoil is scoured down to the bedrock, and the air is still, heavy with the scent of wet mud and desolation. This is the state of the human colon after the ravages of dysentery or cholera. The intricate, teeming rainforest of the microbiome, trillions of organisms that once sang the song of digestion, has been silenced. The walls of the intestine, once a bustling marketplace of nutrient exchange, are now empty streets, slick and quiet. The host, our ancient ancestor, lies on a bed of furs or a mat of woven reeds. They are weak, a husk of the person they were days ago. Their skin is pale, drawn tight over the cheekbones. Their eyes are sunken, gazing up at the soot-stained ceiling of a cave or the thatch of a Neolithic hut. They have survived the fire, but they are now facing the winter. Without the old friends, the bacteria that break down food, synthesize vitamins, and train the immune system, the body is a machine with no fuel, a fortress with no garrison. If they were to eat now, the food would pass through them like a ghost, its energy locked away, inaccessible. It is in this fragile, terrifying moment of stillness that the silent witness speaks. Deep in the lower right quadrant of the abdomen, in the dark warmth where the small intestine meets the large, the appendix begins to stir. Throughout the violence of the purge, it has remained sealed, a safe house with its doors bolted against the chaos. Its narrow neck, contracted by muscle, and its protective shield of biofilm have kept the rushing waters of the illness at bay. Inside this tiny worm-like tube, the air is calm, the chemistry is stable, and the inhabitants, the seed stock of the self, are waiting. This is the moment the Ark opens. It is not a mechanical opening, like the creaking of rusty hinges, but a biological unveiling. As the inflammation in the main gut subsides, as the chemical signals of distress fade from the bloodstream, the muscles around the appendix relax. The tension that held the gate shut dissolves. The biofilm, that gelatinous curtain that separated the clean from the unclean, begins to soften and permeable. Like the doors of a great vessel swinging open after the floodwaters have receded, the appendix releases its protected inhabitants. We must visualize this not from our towering human perspective, but from the microscopic vantage point of the single cell. Imagine standing at the mouth of the appendix. Behind you lies the sanctuary, a dense, crowded, thriving city of bacteria. Bacteroids, firmicutes, bifidobacteria, the ancient lineages that have traveled with us since the dawn of vertebrates. They are packed together in the dark, a living library of our evolutionary history. Before you lies the colon, a vast, empty cavern, stretching out into the distance, dark and silent, stripped of life. And then, the migration begins. It is a resurrection at the cellular level. Tentatively at first, and then with increasing confidence, the bacteria swarm out from the appendix. They spill over the threshold, moving into the barren wasteland of the large intestine. It is a recolonization effort of epic proportions. History tells us of the great human migrations, the crossing of the Bering Land Bridge, the colonization of the Pacific Islands. But here, inside the body, a migration of equal significance takes place every time we recover from a severe illness. These microscopic pioneers move along the mucosal walls. They are the farmers returning to the fields after the war. They find the empty niches, the specific chemical receptors on the lining of the gut, and they anchor themselves. They begin to feed on the mucus, on the remnants of starch, and they begin to divide. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8. In the exponential arithmetic of life, the population explodes. Picture the lights turning back on in a darkened city, block by block, street by street. This is what is happening inside the ancestor. As the bacteria reclaim their territory, the machinery of digestion flickers back to life. They begin to produce butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that acts as fuel for the cells of the colon wall. They begin to synthesize B vitamins and vitamin K, essential for the clotting of blood and the health of the nerves. They send chemical signals to the immune system, a message that says, "We are back. The borders are secure. You can stand down." This tiny, seemingly useless tube provides the starter culture to reboot the entire digestive system. It is a profound act of resilience, an ancient insurance policy written into our DNA. Without this reboot, the recovery would be slow, perhaps impossible. Consider the alternative. In an individual without an appendix, or in a modern human who has had it removed, the gut must wait to be recolonized by bacteria entering from the outside world. This is a game of chance. It relies on the ingestion of the right microbes from food, from contact with others, from the environment. In the sterile world of the modern hospital, this is difficult. In the filth of the Paleolithic world, it was dangerous. To open the gates to the outside world is to invite the enemy back in. The first bacteria to colonize an empty gut are often the opportunists, the pathogens, the weeds that choke the garden. But the appendix provides a curated collection. It ensures that the gut is repopulated not by strangers, but by the old friends. It is a reset button that restores the factory settings of the human microbiome. Let us drift back to a specific moment in time to feel the weight of this mechanism. Let us go to the edge of the receding glaciers 15,000 years ago, and a young woman, a member of a Magdalenian tribe, has been struck down by a virulent stomach virus. For 3 days, she has lain by the fire, her body racked by the purge. The tribe has watched her with the stoic fatalism of the age. They have seen this before. They know that often, even when the sickness stops, the person simply fades away, unable to eat, unable to draw strength from the meat of the reindeer. The great cauldron of her gut is empty. The fire is out. But she carries the Ark. Deep inside her, the appendix has held the line. On the 4th morning, the release begins. While she sleeps a dreamless, exhausted sleep, the armies of life are marching out of their safe house. They are spreading across the lining of her intestine like moss spreading across a stone. They are knitting the unraveled fabric of her biology back together. By the 5th day, she wakes with a sensation she has not felt in an eternity: true hunger. It is not the nausea of sickness, but the sharp, demanding ache of a system that is ready to work. Her mother hands her a broth made from marrow and herbs. She drinks, and this time it stays. The broth travels down to the stomach, and then to the intestines. And there, it meets the newly restored community. The bacteria seize upon the nutrients. They break them down. They pass the energy through the walls of the gut and into her blood. The color returns to her face, a flush of pink under the soot and the pale skin. Her eyes brighten. The winter within is ending. Spring has come to the abdomen. This recovery is not magic. It is the work of the appendix. It is the lifeboat, carried patiently through a lifetime, meant for this singular moment when the waters rose too high. We often speak of evolution in terms of survival of the fittest, interpreting that as the strongest, the fastest, the most aggressive. But the story of the appendix teaches us that survival is often about redundancy. It is about having a backup plan. It is about the ability to endure catastrophe and begin again. The appendix is a testament to the fact that we are not designed for a life of safety. We are designed for a life of crisis. Our anatomy assumes that we will be poisoned. It assumes that we will catch dysentery. It assumes that we will face moments where we are stripped to the bone. And so, it built a bunker. It built a vault. Think of the energy cost of this organ. For decades of a human life, the appendix sits there, consuming blood, consuming oxygen, requiring space. It is like a heavy spare tire carried in the trunk of a car, reducing fuel efficiency, taking up room for luggage. In the short term, it is a burden. But on the lonely, dark road of the Pleistocene, when the tire blows out, that heavy burden becomes the only thing that matters. The cost of carrying it is nothing compared to the cost of not having it. This Ark of Life narrative also reframes our understanding of the vestige. For so long, we looked at the small size of the appendix and assumed it was a withered failure. But in the logic of the safe house, smallness is a virtue. A large, cavernous organ would be hard to seal off. It would be hard to protect from the flow of the purge. The appendix needs to be small. It needs to be narrow. Its form is perfectly suited to its function as a hideout. It is not a withered cecum. It is a concentrated one. It is the difference between a sprawling palace and a fortified keep. When the palace falls, the king retreats to the keep. As the woman in the cave sits up, wrapping the furs around her shoulders, she is likely unaware of the microscopic drama that has just saved her life. She does not know that she is a vessel for trillions of tiny lives. She only knows that the weakness is passing. She knows that she will live to see the spring thaw. She will live to bear children. And to those children, she will pass on not just her knowledge of the herds and the herbs, not just the stories of the tribe, but the biological legacy of the Ark. She will pass on the genetic instructions to build an appendix, and she will pass on the specific bacterial starter culture that inhabits it. Every one of us walking the earth today is the descendant of survivors who carried this Ark. We are here because, in the dark moments of history, during the plagues of Athens, the Black Death, the outbreaks of cholera in the slums of Victorian London, our ancestors had a reset button. We are the children of the reboot. The rhythm of life returns. The heart beats strong. The gut gurgles with the gentle rhythmic sound of healthy digestion. The song of the old friends back at their work. The body is no longer a silent ruin. It is a humming factory, a bustling city, a singing forest. And the appendix? Its doors close once more. The crisis is over. The safe house is replenished, the stock is secured, and the gate is barred. It returns to its vigil. It sits in the darkness, quiet, unassuming, waiting. It knows that the storm will come again. It knows that the world is a dangerous place. But it also knows that life is stubborn, and that as long as the seed is safe, the garden can always be regrown. So, in the quiet of the night, as you feel the rise and fall of your own breath, give a thought to this tiny, misunderstood hero. It is the keeper of the flame. It is the guardian of the continuity of your existence. It is not a mistake. It is a promise that no matter how complete the destruction, there is always a way back. The Ark is sealed. The course is set, and we sail on through the deep time of our lives, carrying our salvation within us. The sun dips below the jagged horizon of the Great Rift Valley, painting the sky in bruises of violet and charcoal. The heat of the day, which has baked the clay of the savannah into a hard, cracked mosaic, finally begins to lift, rising back into the atmosphere like a sigh of relief. In the cooling air, the sounds of the Pleistocene evening emerge, the chittering of roosting birds, the distant cough-like sawing of a leopard, and the crackle of acacia wood burning in a hearth. We sit by this fire, the first technology, the external stomach that allowed us to conquer the night. Its warmth is a comfort, a circle of safety against the encroaching dark. But there is another fire, a darker and more ancient heat that can be kindled not on the hearth, but deep within the body itself. We have spoken of the appendix as a sanctuary, a garden, and an ark. We have praised its resilience and its role as the guardian of the microbiome. But in the biography of the body, there are no unalloyed gifts. Every biological blessing casts a shadow. Every adaptation, no matter how elegant, carries within it the seeds of its own potential failure. Tonight, we must look into that shadow. We must explore the fragility of our design. For the appendix is a narrow vessel, a dead-end street in the complex city of the viscera. And sometimes, by a cruel twist of geometry and fate, the very architecture that makes it a safe harbor also makes it a trap. Let us visualize the anatomy with the precision of a map maker charting a dangerous coast. The appendix is a tube, a slender diverticulum extending from the cecum. Its opening, the ostium, is small, a narrow gate designed to keep the rushing river of the colon from washing out the seed stock within. This narrowness is its strength. It allows the biofilm to form, the sanctuary to remain secluded. But in the physical world, narrow places are prone to blockage. A canyon can be choked by a rock slide. A river can be dammed by a fallen tree. And the appendix, this tiny blind alley, can be sealed shut. Imagine a specific moment in the deep past. Let us travel to a winter encampment on the edge of the Mammoth Steppe, perhaps 20,000 years ago. The wind howls outside, driving snow against the hides of the shelter. Inside, a young hunter, strong and vital, sits wrapped in furs. He has survived the hunt. He has survived the cold. But he has eaten something, perhaps a handful of dried berries with hard, indigestible seeds, or a piece of tough, grit-covered root. In the slow, churning rhythm of his digestion, a small object, a fecalith, a stone made of organic matter and calcium salts, or perhaps a swollen lymph node reacting to a respiratory virus, drifts into the wrong place. It settles over the mouth of the appendix. It fits there with the terrible precision of a key in a lock. The gate is closed. The sanctuary is sealed. At first, there is no signal. The body does not ring a bell. The hunter continues his evening, perhaps repairing a spear point or laughing with his kin. But deep inside, in the microscopic world, a catastrophe has begun. The appendix is a living organ. Its lining secretes mucus, a fluid meant to wash the bacteria and keep the tissue moist. In a healthy state, this fluid flows out into the colon. But now, the exit is barred. The fluid has nowhere to go. The forgotten room begins to fill. Simultaneously, the inhabitants of the room, the bacteria, realize that the ventilation has been cut off. The environment changes. The beneficial relationship, the ancient treaty between host and microbe, begins to break down. Trapped inside with a mounting supply of mucus and no way out, the bacteria do what life always does. They multiply. They bloom in the dark. The population explodes within the confined space. The pressure builds. Visualize this not as a medical diagram, but as a physical sensation rising from the deep geology of the body. The walls of the appendix are thin. As the internal pressure mounts, the tissue begins to stretch. It becomes distended, taut as a drum skin. The tiny blood vessels that lace the surface of the organ are squeezed flat by the pressure from within. The river of blood, bringing oxygen and white blood cells, is choked off. The tissue begins to suffocate. This is the ticking time bomb. For the hunter, the first sign is a whisper of unease. It is not yet pain. It is a vague, visceral discomfort. It sits near the navel, a dull, aching center of gravity that refuses to shift. He rubs his stomach, thinking he has eaten bad meat. He tries to sleep, but the ache is a persistent, nagging presence, like a discordant note in a song. This is the visceral phase of the fire, the organ crying out in the only language it knows, a distress signal sent through the autonomic nerves. Hours pass. The night deepens. The fire in the hearth burns down to embers, but the fire within is growing brighter. The inflammation spreads. The appendix is now angry, red, and swollen, a crimson warning flare in the center of the abdomen. The bacteria are invading the wall of the organ itself. The body's immune system, alerted to the breach, rushes to the scene, but it cannot reach the source. The blockage is absolute. As the inflammation worsens, it reaches the outer lining of the abdomen, the peritoneum. And here, the nature of the suffering changes. The pain shifts. It migrates from the center of the belly, moving down and to the right, settling into the lower quadrant with a terrifying specificity. It transforms from a dull ache into a sharp, unyielding agony. This is somatic pain, precise, cutting, and relentless. The hunter curls into a fetal position. Every movement, every cough, every breath that pushes the diaphragm down sends a jolt of lightning through his side. The muscles of his abdomen go rigid, a board-like stiffness. This is guarding, the body's desperate primitive attempt to create a shield around the injured part, to freeze the torso in stone to prevent further damage. In the days before steel scalpels and sterile lights, before the cool, clean smell of anesthesia, this was a moment of profound horror. The tribe gathers around. The shaman is called. He may be a man of great wisdom, knowing the properties of willow bark for fever and clay for wounds. He may chant the songs that drive away evil spirits. He may place his hands on the hunter's sweating brow. But he is helpless against this enemy. The problem is mechanical. It is structural. No herb can dissolve the stone blocking the gate. No chant can relieve the pressure building in the blind alley. The organ that was designed to save the host from dysentery, the Ark of Life that rebooted the system after the plague, has become the instrument of their end. It is a tragedy of irony. The appendix is killing the host not because it is useless, but because it is too efficient at being a closed system. The very features that made it a perfect safe house, the narrow neck, the secluded location, the ability to harbor a dense population of bacteria, are the exact features that turn it into a grenade. The sun rises on the second day. The hunter is burning with fever. His heart hammers against his ribs, trying to pump blood through a system that is spiraling into shock. Deep inside, the drama reaches its climax. The walls of the appendix, starved of blood and stretched beyond their limit, begin to die. The tissue turns black. Necrosis sets in. The structural integrity of the organ fails. And then, the rupture. For a brief, deceptive moment, the pain might actually vanish. The tension is released. The bomb has detonated. But this relief is the eye of the hurricane. The contents of the appendix, the pus, the dead tissue, the billions of trapped bacteria spill out into the pristine, sterile cavity of the abdomen. The secret garden has been breached, and its contents are now poison. Peritonitis. The word itself sounds like a hiss of steam. The infection spreads like a wildfire across the prairie of the internal organs. It coats the intestines, the liver, the stomach. The body goes into systemic revolt. The blood is poisoned. The hunter slips into delirium. The sights and sounds of the cave, the faces of his kin, the smell of the wood smoke, fade into a gray mist. In the ancient world, this was a fatal sentence. It was a slow, agonizing exit from the stage of life. The fire of infection would burn out the life of the host, consuming the energy, the will, and finally, the breath. A life that had survived the saber-toothed cat, the breaking ice, and the starvation of winter is extinguished by a tube the size of a little finger. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of our design. We often speak of the human body as a masterpiece of engineering, and in many ways, it is. But it is not a machine designed by a single architect with a blueprint. It is a structure built over eons by the tinkering of evolution, a process that works with the materials at hand, making compromises, taking risks. The evolutionary path is walked on a razor's edge. The body battles itself. The protector becomes the threat. The safe house becomes the tomb. But we must ask the difficult question: why? Why did natural selection, that ruthless editor of life, not remove this danger? If appendicitis kills the young before they can reproduce, why are we still born with an appendix? Why didn't the gene for this narrow, dangerous tube fade away into the dust of history? The answer lies in the cold, hard mathematics of survival. It lies in the balance sheet of the species. For millions of years, the threat of appendicitis, terrifying as it was statistically smaller than the threat of starvation and infectious disease. For every one hunter who died of a burst appendix, there were 1,000 who survived the dysentery and the cholera because their appendix rebooted their gut. The appendix saved more lives than it took. It was a grim calculation. Nature accepted the loss of the few to ensure the survival of the many. The fire within was the cost of doing business in a world teeming with microscopic enemies. We paid for our immunity with a structural flaw. We paid for the Ark with the risk of the bomb. This realization brings a new layer of poignancy to our understanding of the body. When we touch the lower right side of our abdomen, we are touching a site of potential betrayal, yes. But we are also touching a site of immense sacrifice. The scars of those ancient ancestors who died of this fire are woven into the genome of our survival. Their deaths were the price paid so that the trait could persist, so that the species could endure the scourges of the plains. As the hunter takes his final breath, returning his carbon to the cycle of the earth, the fire in the hearth continues to burn. The tribe will mourn. They will bury him with his spear and his beads, perhaps wondering what evil spirit claimed him. They cannot see the microscopic tragedy that unfolded in the dark. They cannot know that he was a victim of an anatomical gamble made millions of years ago. But the legacy continues. The survivors of the tribe carry the same gene, the same narrow tube, the same hidden potential for disaster. And they also carry the same potential for resilience. They walk out into the snow, carrying the duality of their existence within them. In the modern world, we have tamed this fire. We have the steel scalpel. We have the sterile light. We have the antibiotics that dampen the flame. We can remove the appendix before it bursts, turning a fatal sentence into a routine inconvenience. We have broken the ancient contract. We no longer need to pay the price in blood. Yet, the ghost of that danger remains. The anxiety we feel when a stomach ache shifts to the right is an ancient anxiety. It is a cellular memory of the time when there was no surgeon to call. It is a respect for the power of the body to turn against itself. So, as you drift towards sleep, let your mind rest on this paradox. The body is a fortress, but the gates are fragile. The body is a machine, but the parts are repurposed. The appendix is a silent witness to the fact that life is not about perfection. It is about the successful management of risk. It is about carrying the fire without being consumed by it. The embers of the hunter's fire fade into ash. The wind covers the tracks in the snow. The deep time of the past swallows the individual story, leaving only the broad stroke of the species. We are here, alive, breathing, because the gamble paid off. The safe house held for enough of us, long enough, to bring us to this moment. The fire within is quiet now. The danger sleeps. And in the silence of the night, the complex, dangerous, beautiful machinery of your own body continues its rhythmic work, walking the razor's edge of life with the confidence of a master acrobat. The fire of the Paleolithic hearth has burned down to ash. The wind that swept across the Neolithic village has quieted. The world moves forward, spinning through the centuries, through the rise of bronze and iron, through the building of pyramids and the crumbling of empires. We leave behind the raw, visceral immediacy of the hunter-gatherer, whose knowledge of the body was written in the language of pain and survival, and we enter a new age. It is an age of glass and steel, of gaslight and ether, of textbooks and scalpels. It is the age of reason. But in the bright, harsh light of this new era, the shadow cast by the appendix grew longer and darker. For generations of surgeons, anatomists, and biologists, this small, worm-like tube ceased to be a mystery and became something far simpler and far more sinister, a villain. Let us step into the operating theater of the late 19th century. The air is thick with the acrid, sweet scent of chloroform, a heavy fog that masks the metallic tang of blood. The room is a gallery of tile and porcelain, cold to the touch, designed for the swift, efficient work of the new priesthood of science. A man lies upon the table, draped in white sheets. Above him, the surgeon stands, a figure of authority, armed with the gleaming instruments of his trade. He looks down at the human abdomen not as a sacred landscape, but as a problem to be solved. When the scalpel parts the flesh, exposing the glistening coils of the intestine, the surgeon's eye is drawn to the lower right quadrant. There it sits, the appendix. To his eyes, trained in the mechanics of the Industrial Revolution, it is a grotesque anomaly. It looks withered. It looks deflated. Unlike the muscular stomach or the pulsing heart, it seems to do nothing. It hangs there, a silent, sullen appendage, prone to infection, prone to rupture, prone to killing the patient in the prime of their life. The appendix, the surgeon declares to the students gathered in the amphitheater, is a tomb waiting to be filled. This was the verdict of the modern age. We looked at this organ and found it wanting. We cut it out with abandon, labeling it a useless hazard, a mistake of creation that served only to introduce chaos into the orderly machine of the body. We dismissed it as evolutionary baggage, a piece of junk DNA made flesh. It was seen as a biological typo, a sentence that nature had forgotten to delete from the manuscript of the human form. To understand this tragic misunderstanding, we must understand the mind of the era. This was the time when humanity fell in love with the machine. We built steam engines that conquered the continents. We built looms that wove cloth faster than any hand. We began to view the universe as a clockwork mechanism, predictable and rational. And inevitably, we turned this gaze upon ourselves. We began to see the body not as a garden to be tended, but as a machine to be optimized. In a machine, every part must have an immediate, visible function. A gear must turn, a piston must pump, a lever must lift. If a part does not move, if it does not produce a visible output, it is deemed redundant. Even worse, if a part causes the machine to break down, as the appendix so often did with its fiery explosions, it is deemed defective. And so, the prophylactic appendectomy was born. It became a rite of passage, a triumphant conquest of man over nature. If you were going in for surgery on the gallbladder, why not take the appendix too? It was just hanging there, a potential time bomb. Better to remove it now than risk the fire later. We treated the appendix like a loose screw in the chassis of a car, something to be discarded to streamline the vehicle. We did not listen to the silence. There is a profound arrogance in the human present, a belief that what we cannot see does not exist. We looked at the appendix with our naked eyes, and we saw emptiness. We poked it with our probes, and it did not react. We measured it, weighed it, and found it insignificant. But we did not understand that its quietness was not emptiness, but patience. We did not understand that in the deep, slow time of biology, silence is often a form of work. Imagine walking through a library at night. The aisles are quiet. The books are motionless on the shelves. To a casual observer, nothing is happening. There is no noise, no movement, no industry. One might conclude that the library is useless, that the books are merely taking up space, but this conclusion ignores the potential energy stored within the pages. It ignores the fact that the library is a repository of memory, waiting for the moment it is needed. The appendix was our library. It was the secret garden we spoke of in earlier chapters, the Ark of Life that held the backup codes for our survival. But we were illiterate to its language. We burned the library because we didn't see any smoke coming from the chimney. This misunderstanding reached its zenith in the mid-20th century, as humanity began to push the boundaries of exploration. We set our sights on the most hostile environments imaginable, the frozen wastes of Antarctica, the crushing depths of the ocean, and finally, the vacuum of space. Consider the astronauts of the Apollo era, or the researchers wintering over at the South Pole. These were the best of us, the strongest, the most physically perfect specimens our species could produce. We spent millions of dollars training them, equipping them, wrapping them in technology to keep them alive in the void. And as part of their preparation, a question was often asked. Should we remove the appendix? It seemed like a logical precaution. If an astronaut is 3 days' journey from Earth, halfway to the moon, and their appendix bursts, they are dead. There is no surgery in zero gravity. There is no evacuation from a blizzard that lasts 6 months. The fire within was a risk the mission planners could not accept. And so we stripped them. We opened up these healthy men and women and cut out the useless tube. We sent them into the void, into the most sterile and dangerous environments the universe has to offer, and we did so by removing their primary defense against internal collapse. We stripped them of their reserve tank before sending them on the longest journey of their lives. It was the misunderstood exile of human anatomy, unappreciated and maligned. There is a deep irony here, one that a poetic paleoanthropologist might weep over. The very people who needed the Ark the most, the explorers venturing into isolation, eating sterilized food, living in high-stress environments that wreak havoc on the gut microbiome, were the ones we deliberately disarmed. We sent them out with a missing piece. We treated the body as a set of modular components, assuming we could subtract one without altering the whole. We forgot that nature rarely writes a word without meaning. Evolution is a ruthless editor. As we have seen in the Great Shrinking, the body is expensive. Every gram of tissue requires calories to build and blood to maintain. If a structure is truly useless, if it is merely a vestige dragging us down, natural selection will scour it away. It might take 1,000,000 years or 2,000,000, but it will happen. The fact that the appendix has persisted for over 80 million years, appearing in the lineages of wombats, rabbits, beavers, and primates, should have given us pause. It should have whispered to us that there was a reason. But the language of the appendix is written in a script we had yet to learn to read. It is written in the language of immunology and microbiology. These are sciences of the invisible. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, we were just beginning to understand bacteria as enemies. We had not yet conceived of them as friends. We knew about germs. We did not know about the microbiome. We saw the lion. We did not see the ecosystem that supported the lion. And so, we severed the connection. We disrupted the subtle harmony of the body, unaware of the consequences. What happens when you remove the exile? For decades, we thought the answer was nothing. The patient recovers from the surgery. They go back to work. They eat. They digest. They live. See? The surgeon said. It was useless. You don't miss it. But deep in the data, buried in the medical records of millions of people, a different story began to emerge. It was a story of subtle, long-term vulnerability. Researchers began to notice patterns. People who had their appendices removed were more likely to suffer from recurrent Clostridium difficile infections, a terrible antibiotic-resistant plague that scours the gut. Why? Because when the antibiotics wiped out their internal forest, they had no safe house to replant it from. The Ark was gone. The library had been burned. They were left with a barren field, and the weeds took over. We began to see links to autoimmune diseases, to allergies, to a host of modern maladies that stem from a dysregulated immune system. It turned out that the useless tube was not just a hiding place for bacteria, it was a training ground. It was a school where the immune system learned to tell the difference between a friend and a foe. By removing it, we were removing the education of our own defenses. We had treated the body like a house, assuming that knocking down a wall in the basement wouldn't affect the roof. But the body is not a house. It is a song. It is a continuous, resonant vibration where every note supports the others. When you remove the appendix, you remove a bass note, low, quiet, perhaps unnoticed when it is playing, but leaving a hollow, thin silence when it is gone. This chapter of our history, the era of the Misunderstood Exile, is a cautionary tale. It is a story about the limits of human knowledge. We looked at a structure that had survived the ice ages, the droughts, and the plagues, and we declared it obsolete because we couldn't figure out how to turn it on. We judged deep time by the standards of a wristwatch. We projected our own metaphors onto the body. In the industrial age, we saw a machine. In the space age, we saw a capsule. In the computer age, we saw code. And in each era, we tried to fix the glitch of the appendix. But the body is none of these things. It is an organism. It is a river. It is a ghost story told by chemical bonds. As we stand now in the 21st century, looking back at the piles of discarded appendices in the medical waste bins of history, we must feel a sense of humility. We were wrong. The villain was actually a hero in disguise. The tomb was actually a womb for the microscopic life that sustains us. The exile is beginning to return. We are starting to listen to the silence. We are peering into the microscope and seeing the shimmering biofilm, the complex interaction of lymphoid tissue and bacteria. We are realizing that the worm is actually a sentinel. But for the millions who lost this part of themselves, for the generations who were told it was junk, the silence remains. They walk through the modern world a little more vulnerable, a little more exposed, stripped of the ancient insurance policy that their ancestors carried across the savannah. They are the children of the surgical age, the era where we thought we knew better than the earth that made us. So, let us honor the misunderstood exile. Let us recognize that in the vast, mysterious cathedral of the human body, there are no spare parts. There are only mysteries waiting to be solved. The appendix sat there, maligned and ridiculed, holding its secrets, waiting for us to grow up enough to understand its value. It waited through the insults. It waited through the scalpels. It is waiting still, a silent testament to the fact that survival is a complex art, and that sometimes the most important things are the ones that do nothing at all, until the moment they are the only thing that can save you. The fire of the ancient hearth has dimmed to a faint, pulsing glow, and the great silence of the night has descended upon the world. We have traveled through the corridors of deep time, witnessing the slow metamorphosis of the human form, from the leaf-eaters of the Miocene canopy to the fire-starters of the frozen tundra. We have seen the Great Cauldron wither, and we have seen the Hollow Remnant endure. We have walked the razor's edge of survival, where a single organ could be both a savior and a killer. But now, the lens of our story shifts. We must step away from the macroscopic world, the world of bone and stone, of blizzard and drought, and peer into a universe that our ancestors could never have imagined. We must adjust our focus from the horizon to the infinitesimal. For centuries, we judged the appendix by its outward appearance, by its small stature and its silence. But as the 20th century dawned, and as the glass of the microscope grew clearer, humanity began to see the ghost in the machine. We began to see that the silence was not emptiness. It was the hush of a library. It was the quiet concentration of a sentry at his post. Let us descend once more into the warm, dark interior of the body. But this time, let us look not with the eyes of the anatomist, who sees only shapes and structures, but with the eyes of the immunologist, who sees the invisible wars and the silent treaties that keep us alive. When we stain the tissue of the appendix and place it under high magnification, the useless tube disappears. In its place, a complex, vibrant landscape emerges. We discover that the walls of the appendix are not merely muscular casings. They are rich, incredibly densely rich, in lymphoid tissue. It is woven from the same cloth as the tonsils that guard the throat and the Peyer's patches that dot the small intestine. It is a specialized fabric, a mesh of biological intelligence designed for a singular purpose: defense. The appendix, it turns out, is a fortress. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we must visualize the geography of the gut as a strategic map. The human digestive tract is a long, winding borderland. It is the frontier where the outside world, the food we eat, the water we drink, the dirt on our hands, meets the inside world of the blood and the tissues. It is a dangerous border. It is patrolled by the immune system, the body's internal army, and the appendix sits at the most critical crossroads of all, the junction of the small and large intestines. Imagine the small intestine as a pristine river, a place of absorption where nutrients are extracted in relative cleanliness. Then imagine the large intestine as a teeming, murky swamp, the home of trillions of bacteria, the engine of fermentation. The appendix sits at the gate between these two worlds. It is the checkpoint. It is the customs house. Here, in the quiet backwaters of the gut, the body has established a training ground. The lymphoid tissue within the appendix is organized into structures called follicles. Picture them as military academies, or perhaps more poetically, as monastic schools hidden in the mountains. Here, the naive immune cells, the B cells and the T cells, fresh from the bone marrow and the thymus, come to finish their education. They are raw recruits. They have the potential to defend the body, but they do not yet know the face of the enemy. In the silence of the appendix, they are taught. The curriculum of this school is one of the most difficult and nuanced in all of nature. It is the lesson of self versus non-self, and more importantly, the lesson of friend versus foe. Consider the complexity of this task. A virus is a foe. It must be destroyed. A distinct bacteria, like Salmonella, is a foe. It must be attacked. But a piece of apple? That is foreign DNA, but it is food. It must be welcomed. And the trillions of old friends, the beneficial bacteria we discussed in the secret garden, they are foreign, yes, but they are allies. They must be tolerated. They must be protected. If the immune system makes a mistake, the consequences are catastrophic. If it attacks the food or the good bacteria, we get allergies and autoimmune diseases, the body burning itself down. If it fails to attack the virus, we die of infection. The balance is razor thin, and it is here, in the appendix, that the calibration takes place. Imagine a day in the life of a microscopic pilgrim, a young B cell entering the tissues of the appendix. It flows in from the bloodstream, navigating the capillaries, and settles into the lymphoid follicle. It is surrounded by the hum of chemical signals. Above it, on the surface of the appendix lining, specialized M cells are at work. These M cells are like scouts. They reach out into the lumen of the gut, grab samples of passing bacteria and proteins, and pull them down into the tissue. They present these samples to the young immune cells. It is a biological briefing. Look at this, the chemical signals say. This is a protein from a hazelnut. It is safe. Do not attack. Or, look at this. This is the surface marker of a cholera bacterium. Memorize it. If you see it again, kill it. This is the Sentinel's watch. It is not a passive observation. It is an active, ceaseless cataloging of the world. The appendix is constantly sampling the environment of the gut, reading the biological news, and updating the immune system's database. It is the intelligence agency of the abdomen. For the ancestor living in the Pleistocene, this function was not a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. Let us transport ourselves back to a specific moment, a summer evening in the Great Rift Valley 50,000 years ago. A hunter sits by a drying stream, cracking open the bones of a scavenged antelope to eat the marrow. The meat is old. The water is stagnant. The meal is a biological hazard. As he swallows, he is introducing a chaotic mix of potential nutrients and potential killers into his system. The stomach acid kills some, but not all. As the chyme moves down into the intestines, it passes the opening of the appendix. The sentinel is awake. Deep within the lymphoid tissue, the alarm is raised. But it is a subtle, targeted alarm. The scouts detect a new pathogen. The immune cells in the appendix, trained for this moment, begin to react. They do not launch a scorched earth purge immediately. First, they produce a specific molecule, immunoglobulin A, IgA. Think of IgA not as a bomb, but as a subtle ammunition. It is a sticky protein that the body secretes into the gut. It coats the bacteria. It shackles them. It prevents them from burrowing into the walls of the intestine, neutralizing them without destroying the surrounding tissue. It is a precise, elegant containment strategy. The appendix is a factory for this IgA. It pumps these antibodies into the gut, creating a protective varnish over the lining of the colon. It creates a zone of peace. It allows the hunter to digest his questionable meal without triggering a fatal inflammation. It keeps the peace in the borderland. We realized with a sudden, humble clarity that we had been wrong for centuries. This useless tube was actually a highly specialized immunological factory. It was not a vestige of the past. It was a sophisticated adaptation for a dirty world. The narrative of the vestige was born of our own ignorance. We saw that the appendix didn't digest food, so we assumed it did nothing. We were like a person looking at a radar station and concluding it was useless because it didn't manufacture bullets. We did not understand that information is as valuable as ammunition. We did not understand that in the war for survival, knowing the enemy is half the battle. This realization rewrites the biography of the body. It transforms the appendix from a sad, withering tale into a noble guardian. It adds a layer of dignity to our anatomy. We are not carrying around a trash can. We are carrying a university. And this university has a long memory. The immune cells trained in the appendix don't just stay there. They migrate. They enter the lymphatic system and travel to other parts of the gut, even to the lungs and the sinuses. They carry the knowledge they gained in the appendix to the far reaches of the body. A lesson learned in the lower right quadrant protects the entire organism. So, when the ancient hunter breathed in the dust of the savanna, or when the modern commuter breathes in the aerosol of a sneeze on a crowded train, the body reacts with a wisdom that was partly forged in the quiet backwaters of the appendix. This duality, the safe house and the training ground, completes the picture of the organ. It is a safe house for the good bacteria, the Ark, and a training ground for the defense against the bad bacteria, the Sentinel. It manages the peace, and it prepares for the war. It is the diplomat and the general, housed in a single slender tube. There is a profound beauty in this economy. Nature does not waste space. It took the shrinking remnant of the Great Cauldron, the leftover tissue from the days of the leaf-eaters, and repurposed it. It turned a digestive vat into an immune bunker. It beat the sword into a shield. It is a testament to the fluidity of biological design, the way life improvises with the materials at hand to meet the changing demands of the earth. As we look deeper into this microscopic fabric, we also begin to understand the modern plagues. We see why appendicitis is so common in the industrialized world. Perhaps, in our hyper-clean, sanitized lives, the Sentinel is bored. It has no enemies to fight. It has no parasites to study. And so, like a bored soldier, it becomes restless. It overreacts to minor irritants. It inflames. The fire within might be, in part, a symptom of an immune system with too much firepower and no target. But let us not linger on the failure tonight. Let us linger on the success. Imagine the millions of quiet victories this organ has won for you. The times you ate something slightly off and didn't get sick. The times a virus brushed against your system and was neutralized before you even felt a fever. The times the balance of your inner garden was threatened, and the Sentinel held the line. It asks for no credit. It sends no invoice. It hums with the quiet industry of defense, deep in the dark, protecting us from the shadows. It is a connection to the deep past, yes, but it is also a vital participant in the immediate present. As you lie here, safe and warm, the Sentinel is on watch. The microscopic scouts are sampling the river. The teachers are instructing the students. The factory is producing its subtle ammunition. The ghost in the machine is not a ghost at all. It is a guardian angel, woven from flesh and blood. It is a silent partner in the complex, beautiful, and dangerous business of being alive. The mystery is fading, replaced by a deep, abiding respect for the wisdom carved into our bones. The watchman is at his post. The night is dark, but the borders are secure. The night sky above the African savanna is a sprawling, chaotic tapestry of light, a spilled vessel of milk and diamonds that stretches from one horizon to the other. If you were to lie on your back in the cooling sand of the Great Rift Valley, listening to the chirping of the crickets and the distant rhythmic huffing of a resting lion, you would be looking into the past. The light from those stars has traveled for millions of years to reach your retina. You are seeing the universe not as it is, but as it was. It is an echo of ancient fires, a ghost of energy that refuses to fade. But there is another echo, closer to home, that is just as ancient and just as profound. It does not live in the vacuum of space, but in the warm, saline darkness of your own cells. It is written in the spiraling chemical architecture of your DNA, and it is manifested in the physical structures of your body. We look now at the appendix, and we see more than a tube, more than a safe house, more than a sentinel. We see a map. We see a coordinate on a journey that began long before the first human foot pressed a footprint into the mud. This small, unassuming finger of tissue is a genetic echo reverberating through the canyons of deep time. To understand this echo, we must widen our gaze. We must look beyond the human experience and recognize our place in the great breathing brotherhood of mammals. We are not solitary travelers on this planet. We are part of a lineage, a tangled family tree whose roots drink from the same deep aquifers of history. Consider the wombat. Drift in your mind's eye to the dry, eucalyptus-scented scrublands of Australia. It is dusk. The heat of the day is bleeding out into the red earth. A creature emerges from a burrow, a sturdy, furry tank of an animal, moving with a slow, deliberate waddle. It is a wombat, a marsupial separated from us by over 100 million years of evolution. Our last common ancestor was a small, shrew-like creature that scurried under the feet of dinosaurs. And yet, if you were to look inside the abdomen of this Australian grazer, you would find a familiar friend. The wombat possesses an appendix. It possesses a specialized cecal patch, a safe house for bacteria, a mechanism for digesting the tough, fibrous grasses of the bush. Now, travel across the ocean to a meadow in Europe, wet with the morning dew. A rabbit freezes, its long ears swiveling to catch the sound of a hawk. The rabbit, too, is a master of fermentation. It carries within it a massive cecum and a specialized appendix-like structure, a vital organ for its survival. And finally, look to the mist-shrouded mountains of the Virungas. A silverback gorilla sits in a clearing of wild celery, chewing slowly, his dark eyes watching the forest. He is our cousin, our blood kin, and deep inside him the same architecture exists. The great apes, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, the orangutans, all share this trait with us. This distribution is not an accident. It is a pattern. It is a message tapped out in the Morse code of nucleotides. The presence of the appendix across such a diverse array of species, some grazers, some omnivores, some living in burrows, some in trees, tells us that this organ is not a fleeting trend. It is a deep-seated survival strategy. It is a solution that nature found millions of years ago and decided to keep. When we look at the appendix, we are looking at a shared inheritance. It is a genetic heirloom passed down through the breakup of continents, through the falling of meteors, through the freezing and thawing of the poles. It binds us to the wombat and the rabbit. It reminds us that we are all struggling with the same fundamental problem: how to extract energy from a hostile world, and how to maintain a garden of microscopic allies in a gut constantly under siege. The appendix is a bridge. It connects the deep past of the grazer to the modern reality of the human. Imagine the genetic code as a long, intricate scroll, unrolling over miles. Most of the text is copied faithfully from one generation to the next, but occasionally there is a smudge, a typo, a silent error in the code of life. A mutation occurs. If that mutation is harmful, the lineage dies out. The scroll is torn. But if the mutation is neutral or even slightly beneficial, it remains. The gene that builds the appendix is one of those stubborn paragraphs that refuses to be edited out. It tells the story of our diet. It speaks of a time when we were not the masters of fire, but the servants of the leaf. It speaks of the millions of years our ancestors spent chewing, the great grinding of molars that echoed through the Miocene forests. The appendix is the physical memory of that fiber-rich world. It is a monument to the cellulose, but it also tells the story of our diseases. As we have seen, the appendix evolved, or rather, was co-opted, to serve as a safe house during times of infection. This repurposing is a testament to the brutality of our history. If the world had been a sterile paradise, the appendix might have disappeared entirely. But the world was not a paradise. It was a place of cholera and dysentery, of rot and decay. The persistence of the appendix is a scar that proves we survived the war. It is a medal pinned to the inside of the colon, awarded for surviving the great purges of the Pleistocene. This brings us to a profound realization about the nature of the human body. We often like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the finished product, polished and perfect. We imagine that we were designed from the ground up to be the intelligent, upright, tool-using rulers of the earth. But the appendix whispers a different truth. It reminds us that we are not a finished product. We are a mosaic. We are a patchwork quilt of our history, stitched together by the necessity of survival. We are a walking museum of the eras we have lived through. Look at your hand. It is the modified fin of a fish, reshaped to grasp a branch, then refined to hold a stone, and finally, to type on a keyboard. Look at your spine. It is a horizontal suspension bridge that has been forced to stand vertically, a compromise that leaves us with aching backs but frees our hands. And look at your gut. It is the digestive system of a primate, adjusted for the diet of a cook, carrying the vestige of a grazer. We carry the savanna, the jungle, and the bacterial ocean within us. The appendix is the most potent symbol of this mosaic nature. It is a kludge, an engineering term for a clumsy but effective solution to a problem. Evolution does not build from scratch. It tinkers. It modifies what is already there. When the climate dried and the forests withered, nature did not design a new digestive system for Homo sapiens. It simply took the old Great Cauldron and cinched it tight. It took the fermentation vat and turned it into a bunker. This is the beauty of the genetic echo. It is the sound of life improvising. Imagine an ancestor standing on the shores of Lake Toba, 74,000 years ago. The great supervolcano has just erupted. The sky is black with ash. The sun is blotted out. A volcanic winter is descending that will last for years. The human population is crashing. We are reduced to a few thousand breeding pairs, a tiny, fragile thread of life clinging to existence in a freezing, dying world. In this moment of the bottleneck, every calorie counts. Every bout of sickness is a potential death sentence. The appendix, sitting quietly in the gut of that shivering ancestor, is working overtime. It is rebooting the microbiome after a bout of bad water. It is training the immune system to fight off the pathogens breeding in the cramped caves. It is holding the line. If the appendix had been truly useless, if it had been merely evolutionary baggage, the energy cost of maintaining it might have been too high. The individuals with this organ might have starved a little faster, but they didn't. They survived. They passed through the bottleneck. And because they survived, you are here tonight. The echo continued. To touch the skin above the appendix, that soft spot in the lower right abdomen, is to touch a history book bound in blood and bone. It is to make contact with the ghosts of the Toba catastrophe, the survivors of the Ice Age, the wanderers of the Green Sahara. It is a tactile connection to the continuity of life. This perspective shifts our view of the flaws in our body. We tend to curse the appendix when it inflames, just as we curse our backs when they ache or our wisdom teeth when they impact. We see them as design errors. But in the deep time of biology, there are no errors, only trade-offs. The appendix is a compromise struck between biology and environment. It is the result of a negotiation between the need for a reservoir of bacteria and the risk of infection. Survival is not about perfection. The perfect organism does not exist, because the environment is always changing. The perfect organism for the jungle is a failure in the desert. The perfect organism for the hot earth is a failure in the ice age. Survival is about adaptability. It is about being good enough to make it to tomorrow. It is about having spare parts, backup plans, and hidden reserves. The appendix is the embodiment of this stubborn persistence. It represents life clinging to every advantage, no matter how small, no matter how risky. It is a gambler's token, carried in the pocket of the species for 80 million years. As we drift deeper into this understanding, the separation between us and nature begins to dissolve. We are not observers of nature. We are nature. The same forces that shape the curve of the river and the height of the mountain have shaped the curve of your gut and the depth of your appendix. The genetic echo that resonates in you also resonates in the wolf, the whale, and the wombat. We are part of a grand, messy, beautiful experiment. The code of life is not a rigid blueprint, but a jazz improvisation, constantly changing key, constantly finding new melodies over the old rhythm. The appendix is a recurring motif in this song. It fades, it swells, it changes function, but it remains. In the silence of the genome, the story is written. It is a story of incredible length and complexity. It tells of the time when we were small, furry things hiding from the thunder of reptile footsteps. It tells of the time we took to the trees and became giants. It tells of the time we came down to the ground and learned to run. And through it all, this small, hollow tube traveled with us, a silent passenger on the Ark of the body. It is a humbling thought. We spend our lives focused on our brains, our hands, our faces, the parts of us that interact with the modern world. But deep inside, in the dark, the ancient world lives on. The genetic echo is deafening if you know how to listen. It sings of resilience. It sings of the incredible power of life to endure. So, as the night deepens and the stars wheel overhead, mirroring the spiral of the DNA within, let us accept our mosaic nature. Let us make peace with our imperfections. We are not machines built for a singular purpose. We are ancient, wandering cathedrals, built stone by stone over eons, full of hidden rooms and secret passages, carrying the memories of every storm we have ever weathered. The Appendix is just one of these rooms, a small, quiet chapel in the vast structure of the self, echoing with the whispers of the ancestors. The fire has burned down to its final glowing coals. The great sweeping narrative of the day is drawing to a close, and the world outside the window has surrendered to the velvet embrace of the night. It is the same night that fell over the canopy of the Miocene forest. It is the same darkness that draped the shoulders of the Rift Valley. It is the same vast, star-dusted silence that watched over the glaciers of the Ice Age. The noise of the modern world, the hum of the machines, the glare of the screens, the frantic pace of the clock, begins to dissolve, receding like a tide that has pulled away from the shore, leaving only the wet, quiet sand of your own being. So tonight, as you drift toward that threshold between waking and dreaming, consider the silent companion resting within you. We have spent this journey dissecting it, analyzing it, and tracing its lineage through the deep geology of time. But now, in the quiet, we can simply acknowledge it. It is no longer a mystery to be solved, nor a mistake to be corrected. It is an ancient safe house, a keeper of the peace, a sentinel in the dark. It is a physical manifestation of the fact that life, in all its fragility, is stubborn. It wants to continue. Let your mind wander back one last time through the corridors of history we have walked together. Feel the weight of the millions of years that reside in your own abdomen. This small worm-like tube, this quiet companion, has been a passenger on the most extraordinary voyage imaginable. It was there when your ancestors were small, fur-covered creatures scuttling through the underbrush, hiding from the thunderous footsteps of the dinosaurs. It was there, churning and fermenting, when we took to the trees, living in the three-dimensional maze of the Green Cathedral, digesting the endless leaves of a planet that was essentially one great garden. Think of the continuity. Through all those eons, through the shifting of tectonic plates that tore continents apart and crashed them together to raise the Himalayas, the genetic instructions for this organ were carefully copied, generation after generation. Mothers passed it to daughters, fathers to sons. It was a precious inheritance, a tool for survival that could not be left behind. Picture an ancestor. Let's call her Eve, or perhaps something older, something nameless, sleeping in the crook of a baobab tree under a Pliocene moon. She curls her knees to her chest, protecting the soft vulnerability of her belly. She dreams of fruit, of water, of safety. And deep inside her, the appendix is awake. It is tending its garden. It is keeping the old friends, the beneficial bacteria, warm and safe against the chill of the prehistoric night. She does not know it is there. She has no word for microbiome or lymphoid tissue. She only knows that she is alive, that her gut is quiet, and that she will wake to see the sun rise. You are the heir to that sleep. You are the heir to that survival. As the wheel of time turned and the lush forests gave way to the scorching heat of the savanna, the quiet companion remained. It adapted. It watched as the body elongated, as the legs grew strong for running, as the brain expanded to master the tool and the fire. It felt the change in diet, the shift from the slow grazing of the herbivore to the opportunistic feasting of the hunter-gatherer. It saw the Great Cauldron shrink, sacrificing its bulk so that the mind could soar, but it did not leave. It simply retreated, becoming more concentrated, more specialized. It journeyed with your ancestors through the freezing bottlenecks of the ice ages. Imagine the cold, a cold so deep it cracked stones and froze the breath in the throat. The tribes huddled in caves, pressing together for warmth, their survival hanging by a thread. In those long, dark winters, when food was scarce and the water was hard to find, the body's resilience was tested to its limit. Yet, the safe house held. The appendix kept the reserve forces of the immune system ready. It maintained the bacterial seed stock, ensuring that when the spring thaw finally came and the first green shoots pushed through the snow, the body would be ready to digest, to absorb, to live. It has rebooted the fires of life after the plagues of history. We have spoken of the scourge of the plains, of the dysentery and the cholera that swept through the early villages like invisible wildfires. We have imagined the devastation of the gut, the washing away of the internal forest. But we must also imagine the recovery. We must imagine the moment of grace when the appendix opened its doors, releasing the survivors to replant the earth of the self. How many times in your own lineage did this happen? How many of your grandfathers and grandmothers, stretching back into the mists of time, survived a fever that should have killed them simply because this tiny tube intervened? You are here today, breathing this air, lying in this bed, because the quiet companion did its job. It is a veteran of 1,000 biological wars, bearing the silent metals of your existence. It rests there now, quiet and unassuming. It does not demand attention like the heart, with its rhythmic thumping. It does not demand fuel like the lungs, with their ceaseless expansion and contraction. It sits in the dark warmth of the lower right quadrant, a humble servant. It holds the reserve forces of your well-being, the biofilms, the antibodies, the memories of every pathogen your lineage has ever defeated. This realization, that you carry such a sophisticated protector, should bring a sense of profound comfort. It is a reminder that you are never truly alone. The concept of aloneness is a trick of the mind, an illusion of the ego. Biologically, you are a colony. You are a world unto yourself. You are a planet teeming with life, a host to trillions of microscopic beings who rely on you and upon whom you rely. Think of yourself as a great ship sailing through the ocean of the night. You are the captain, yes, steering the vessel with your conscious thoughts. But below decks, in the engine rooms and the galleys, a crew of billions is working. They are patching the hull. They are fueling the fires. They are manning the radar. And the appendix? The appendix is the vault where the blueprints of the ship are kept, safe from fire and flood, ensuring that no matter what storms may come, the ship can be rebuilt. This is the biography of the body. It is a story that tells us we are built to endure. We are not fragile things, easily broken. We are anti-fragile. We are designed to face the chaos of the world, the bacteria, the viruses, the changing climates, and come out stronger. The appendix is the physical symbol of this resilience. It is the plan B written into your flesh. So let the worry of the day dissolve. Let the anxieties that plague the modern mind, the deadlines, the emails, the social pressures, fade away. They are fleeting things, mere ripples on the surface of the water. Deep down, in the ocean of your biology, there is a calm that has lasted for millions of years. Trust in the silent wisdom of your own design. We often spend our lives fighting our bodies, trying to mold them, silence them, or ignore them. We treat them as vehicles that are failing us. But tonight, offer a moment of gratitude. Your body has brought you this far. It has navigated the hazards of childhood, the risks of the environment, the wear and tear of gravity. And it has done so with an intelligence that far surpasses your conscious understanding. The appendix is just one part of this symphony, but it is a poignant one. It represents the useless things that are actually essential. It teaches us that value is not always about movement or noise. Sometimes value is found in stillness. Sometimes the most important thing a part can do is simply wait. The ancient watchman is at his post. Visualize the sentinel we spoke of. In the microscopic landscape of your gut, the immune cells are patrolling the borderlands. They are calm, efficient, and well-trained. They are distinguishing between friend and foe with a chemical precision that rivals any computer. The appendix is humming with the quiet industry of defense. It is producing the IgA, the varnish that coats your insides, protecting you while you sleep. You do not need to direct it. You do not need to worry about it. It has been doing this since before you were born, and it will continue to do it until you take your final breath. The safe house is secure. The doors of the Ark are closed, but they are unlocked, ready to swing open if the need arises. The seed stock of your internal garden is safe within the biofilm. The fire within is contained. The warmth it generates is the warmth of life, not of destruction. The balance is held. As your breathing slows, matching the ancient rhythm of the tides, feel the connection to the earth that made you. You are made of the same carbon that was once a leaf in the Green Cathedral. You are made of the same water that flowed in the rivers of the Pleistocene. You are made of the same stardust that formed the galaxy. And you are protected by the same mechanisms that saved the wombat, the rabbit, and the gorilla. You are part of the great breathing web of life. You are held by it. The story continues. It does not end with this chapter. It continues in the rhythm of your breath, in and out, a tidal exchange with the atmosphere. It continues in the beating of your heart, a drum that has been beating in an unbroken line since the first vertebrate swam in the primal sea. It continues deep into the peaceful night. Sleep now. There is no need to be vigilant. The vigilance is built into you. The sentinel is awake so that you may rest. The guardian is at the gate. The companion is with you. Drift away from the shore of the conscious world. Let the current take you. Float back into the deep time of dreams, where the forests are still green, where the fires are still warm, and where the silence is not empty, but full of love and protection. Good night, traveler. Good night, survivor. Good night. Silence settles. The embers fade. The stars wheel overhead. The journey is complete. The mystery is resting. And in the velvet darkness, the body heals, repairs, and prepares for the dawn that will surely come.